stack development is a comprehensive and integral approach to building digital solutions covering both the front-end and back-end aspects of a web and application development. In an era where technology is constantly advancing, full-stack developers are in high demand for their ability to work on every facet of project. As per talent.com, the yearly income of a full-stack developer in India ranges from 5 lakhs to 20 lakhs per year, while in the United States, it ranges from $97,000 to $149,000 per year. Hello everyone and welcome to this session on the full-stack developer course. Whether you are an aspiring developer seeking to understand the entire development process or a seasoned pro looking to expand your skill set, this course will empower you with the expertise to navigate the ever-changing landscape of the full-stack development effectively. In this full course, you will explore programming languages, frameworks, and the best practices to become a proficient full-stack developer capable of transforming ideas into digital reality. But before we get started, let's take a moment to outline the agenda for today's session. First, we will begin with a brief overview of HTML covering its structure, doc type declaration, elements, and forms. Next, we will explore CSS, a style sheet language used to control content presentation and layout. Within the CSS section, we will discuss its syntax, selectors, the CSS box model, and units. Advancing further, we will provide an introduction to JavaScript, highlighting its benefits and guiding you through setting up a development environment, including JavaScript fundamentals. Afterward, we will provide a brief overview of a jQuery. Then, we will explore the Angular framework, emphasizing how to create dynamic web applications. As we move forward, we will learn to build dynamic and engaging web applications using React.js from scratch. Advancing, we will discuss the introduction to Node.js. We will then proceed to essential backend development components such as MongoDB, REST APIs, and Maven. This will also include important tools like Git, GitHub, as well as Jenkins, where we will explain what a pipeline is, discuss Jenkins files, provide installation guidance, and touch on Docker. Additionally, we will explore full-stack web development using Django. Finally, as we conclude this full-stack developer course, we will present a roadmap to help you become a full-stack web developer. But before we begin, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and hit the bell icon to stay updated on the latest tech content from Edureka. Also, visit the Edureka website for full-stack training and certification courses. The link to which is in the description box below.
So what is full-stack web development? I'm sure you all must have heard of front-end and back-end web development, but what is full-stack web development? Now, full-stack web development basically involves front-end and back-end web development. It requires in-depth knowledge of the different scripting languages like HTML, JavaScript, CSS, which make the web look more interactive and alive. It also requires high-level programming languages such as Java, Python, and so on to code the server side. Apart from this, you also require experience in working with JavaScript frameworks like Node.js and libraries such as jQuery and so on. Now, in the further slides, I'll be covering the different aspects of becoming a full-stack web developer in depth. So stay tuned. So before we move on to what a full-stack developer does and how a front-end and back-end developer works, let's look at the different layers of full-stack. First, we have the presentation layer or the front end of the web. This layer helps you interact with the web, watch videos, perform actions like register to an online shopping site. So guys, whenever you surf a website, the different fonts, images, and the content of the website forms the presentation or the front end of that website. So basically, the design, look, and feel of the web is accomplished with the help of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Then comes the logic layer or the backend layer. Now this layer forms a dynamic connection between the front end and the database. So every time you search the web, it's the logic layer that transmits your requirements to the database and returns what you searched for. All of this is powered by a web server. Now, in order to get this layer working, it's important to know at least one of the programming languages such as Python, Java, or C#. Okay. Now, lastly, we have the database layer. This layer is a massive warehouse of information. It contains a database repository which captures and stores information from the front end through the back end. Now, a prerequisite over here is to have knowledge of how data is stored, edited, retrieved, and so on. Languages such as MySQL, MongoDB are a must to know. Now let's look at the type of web developers. So guys, front-end developers are responsible for a website's look and feel. These developers must be masters at three main languages, which is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. They also need to be familiar with frameworks like Bootstrap, AngularJS, and Ember.js, which make the website look more interactive and alive. Libraries like jQuery also help to package code into a lightweight and compatible form. Now moving on to the back-end developers. Now the back-end of a website consists of three components: the server, the application, and a database. A back-end developer creates and maintains the web server, application, and the database which allows the front end of the website to operate. To make the server, application, and a database to communicate with each other, back-end developers use server-side languages like PHP, Ruby, Python, Java, and .NET to build an application. They also require to operate on tools like MySQL, SQL, MongoDB in order to fetch, store, or edit data and then serve it back to the user in the front end. Now guys, this is how backend developers work. Now moving on to full stack developers. The term full stack developer was popularized in a meeting around 8 years ago when Facebook announced that they are looking to hire only full stack web developers. Now basically a full stack developer should be knowledgeable enough to work on both the front-end technology and the back-end technology. So he needs to have an understanding of how the web works at each and every level, including setting up and configuring Linux or Windows servers, coding server-side APIs, running the client side of the application by using JavaScript, and structuring and designing the web page with CSS and HTML. A full stack developer is like the jack of all trades. One must have enough knowledge to run both the client and the scripting side. Now let's discuss a few key points about why one must practice full stack web development. One of the reasons is the full stack developers can choose from a rich set of tools and technologies for creating and designing unique code. They are not restricted to a certain set of tools for development because there are n number of frameworks and libraries that will assist a full stack developer in achieving an effective web application. Now the next reason is design and development. Now one of the best things about working as a full stack developer is that you're not restricted to only development. As a full stack developer, you can design and style your application, and then if you're bored of designing, you can probably switch to your developer mode. Now developer skills come into handy when you want to create a functional and a bug-free application. A full stack developer is basically a creative person who can both develop and design an application. So guys, I'm not going to lie to you, a full stack developer is like the Stephen Hawking of web development. After mastering various scripting and programming languages and working alongside several frameworks and libraries, a full stack developer is no less than a master. Of course, one requires to have work experience and a lot of knowledge, but nothing is unachievable if you have the will to do it. Apart from that, a full stack developer is highly valued in all parts of the world. In the US, the average salary of a full stack developer is over $110,000. Not only in the US, all around the world, full stack developers are in high demand. Now that you have a basic understanding about what a full stack developer is, let's dive deep into how to become a full stack developer. Let's look at the responsibilities of a developer and what exactly does he do. Alright? So guys, to begin with, you must have a decent understanding of how a website or a web application is built and what tools and technologies are used to do so. So let's begin with our front-end web development. To master front-end web development, you'll need to know many technologies, but the main technologies are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now HTML, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language, is the skeleton of every web page. It defines the structure of the web. Without it, the web would be as shapeless as a lump of clay. By using HTML, you tell the browser how you want your content to be structured by defining the different parts of a web page. For example, you define the content of your web page within HTML tags. Now these tags tell the browser which part are headings, body, sidebars, and footers. This not only helps to structure the web page, it also lets you style each HTML element by selecting them and then adding different style parameters. Now CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets, is like the clothes we wear to look stylish and attractive. The HTML elements we defined can now be styled using CSS. For example, you can change the color of the header, add and style various buttons. You can also use CSS to adjust the width of the HTML elements. You can style them by adding color and design. You can also play around with buttons and make them look colorful and attractive. So guys, you can style a web page in any way you want. CSS has thousands of styling functions which let you design and make a web page look like a beautiful painting. Next up is JavaScript. Now before I get on with how full stack developers use JavaScript, it is important to understand how JavaScript works. JavaScript is basically a language of the web which every browser, PC and mobile phone understands. Now JavaScript can natively run on the browser. By natively, I mean that most of the web browsers like Google Chrome, Safari and Internet Explorer have a JavaScript engine embedded into their browsers. Okay. Now this JavaScript engine interprets the JavaScript code so that it can run on the browser. So guys, this is exactly how JavaScript runs on the web browser. Now where is JavaScript used? Now let's look at an example. So guys, when you're browsing on a web page, you come across many buttons. On clicking these buttons, some event occurs. Now JavaScript has event listeners which perform specific actions on the click of a button. Like for example, on the click of a button, another page might open up or a personal detail form can pop up. All of this is possible only through JavaScript. It is basically used to manipulate the HTML elements, add motions and graphics to them. So any sort of motion that you see on your web page is all JavaScript. Now that you have a good idea of how full stack developers work on the front end, let's look at the back end. Now when a user opens up a web page and clicks on a link or submits some form, or let's say he enters a URL, where does this data get stored and how does the browser return information to the user? So basically the browser connects to a web server. Now a web server is just a computer running an application or a software that delivers resources to the web pages. So guys, when a web server receives a request for a resource, it has to respond with that resource. So how does it do that? Now basically backend developers program the web servers to respond with the right resources. So the main aim of the web server here is to respond with the correct resources. But where do they get these resources? The web server is connected to a database which is continuously pulled on receiving some requests. So the role of a full stack developer here would be to create an application that fills a web page with the required resources by pulling data from the database. Now this application is programmed using server-side languages like Java, Python, PHP, Node.js, and the database is also programmed using languages such as MySQL, MongoDB and SQL. So guys, basically the back end of a web page is used to serve the required resources to a user. So here we just discussed how the front-end development is used to design the user-facing part of a web page that lets us interact with the web page. We also discussed how the back-end is used to deliver a web page to the browser along with the requested resources which are retrieved from a database. So guys, this is what a full-stack developer does. He has to create both the front-end and the back-end of a web page. Alright? Now let's look at some of the important technologies and tools that a full-stack developer must know. First of all, a full-stack developer must choose a code editor that is best suitable for him. There are hundreds of code editors out there. Personally, I switch between Visual Studio Code and Sublime Text. They're the most user-friendly code editors, but you guys can go ahead and choose whichever code editor you like. Now the second tool is a version control system. A version control system basically is used to keep a track of all the changes that you make to your code, files or any sort of documents. Now like the name suggests, it creates versions of your code or your file every time you change something. So let's say that you created a web application and added an additional feature to it. But for some reason this feature slowed down your website and you want to go back to the old version of your website. So usually it is very hard to revert back to an older version, but a version control system takes care of this because it has a track of all the code changes that you've made and it can easily revert back to any code change. Some of the popular version control systems include Git and Subversion. Now guys, there are thousands of JavaScript frameworks and libraries which will come handy during web development. Frameworks like Node.js can help with back-end development of a web page, and JavaScript libraries such as jQuery can help at the front end to design a web page. Then there is Angular, React, Backbone, Meteor, which are all very useful to a full-stack developer. A full-stack web developer is always familiar with a couple of JavaScript frameworks, and the best part of these frameworks is that after learning JavaScript, which you'll definitely need while developing the front end, they are very easy to understand. Next up, we have HTTP protocols. Now, HTTP is basically a stateless application protocol on the internet which allows clients to communicate with the server. So basically, it enables communication between the front end of your web page and the back end. Guys, let me tell you that there are a lot of web developers out there who don't know much about HTTP. But it is quite essential to have an understanding about HTTP and how the internet works. It is also necessary to understand what is REST and why is it important in regards to the HTTP protocol in web applications. Apart from all of this, a full stack developer obviously needs to have prior knowledge about running the application on operating systems such as Linux, Windows, and so on, because at the end of the day, all of this is running on top of an operating system. Also, a lot of full stack developers have brushed up on various project management tools like Jira, Teamwork, Basecamp to effectively carry out the web development process. So guys, becoming a full stack web developer requires good amount of effort and dedication. But is it worth all the effort? I would say definitely it is. It is the most valued designation, and once you practice full stack web development, you'll become a master of the web. And at Edureka, we provide a full stack web development course that has all the required tools and technologies that you need to learn. And we also make sure that you don't just learn it, you master it. So guys, if you're interested in learning the full stack web development master course or any other trending technologies, let us know in the comment section and we'll get back to you at the earliest.
So the idea behind HTML was a modest one. When Tim Berners-Lee was putting together his first elementary browsing and authoring system for the web, he created a quick little hypertext language that would serve his purposes. He imagined dozens or even hundreds of hypertext formats in the future and smart clients that could easily negotiate and translate documents from servers all across the internet. Now HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it is a standard markup language for creating web pages and web applications. It is used to describe the structure of the web pages using a process called markup. Now, HTML mostly constitutes of elements, and these elements are the building blocks of any HTML page and are represented by tags. Now, let me just give you a brief introduction to the structure of HTML. Now, this is also called an HTML boilerplate. So firstly, an HTML boilerplate begins with the HTML tags, which tells the browser that this is an HTML page and this is where it begins from. Next comes the head tag, which contains most of the meta information about the document. The head tag normally also contains the link to the styling sheets, the fonts that you might be using on your web page, and even the JavaScript that you might be using. Now, the head tag also has the title element, which specifies the title for the document and can be seen as a text on the tab that you open on a browser. Now, next comes the body tag, which mostly contains the content that is visible to the viewer of your page. And these contains elements like h1 tags or paragraph tags, which are known by p tags, and they make up the mass of your content. Now, to create an HTML page, there are a few steps. So firstly, you need to open any sort of text editor. It could be Notepad++, Notepad, Sublime Text, or even Visual Studio Code. You have the freedom to use whatever text editor you want. Next, you have to write up some HTML code that you want to show on your web page, and then you just save your file as a .html. And to open the file, all you have to do is just view it on your browser. Now let me just give you a quick demonstration on how that is actually done if you've still not understood that. So let us create a folder first. So let's call this folder HTML demo, and now we're just gonna use Sublime Text because that's my favorite text editor. Out here, all you have to do is create a new file, and I'm going to be saying that it's a HTML type. Then you just fit in your HTML boilerplate. I'm going to tell my title is going to be my first web page, and that is the title of our web page. Now let's put in some content into this. So it's going to have an h1 which says this is just some text. Let's save this. This is going to be saved into our HTML demo. So let's open it. Let's save it as index.html. Now once you've saved it, all you have to do to view it is go into your folder and just open it on your browser. So as you guys can see, the title is written out here on the tab, and this is our h1 that we just created. Okay, so that's how you basically create an HTML page. So let's move on. Now there are some elements that I want to tell you all about, which is very important. So first is the doc type element. So the doc type declaration represents that the file you're working is a document type and helps the browser to display web pages correctly. And it only appears once at the top of the page before any HTML tag, and the doc type declaration is not case sensitive. Okay, so this is what HTML actually looks like. Now before we move further with some HTML coding, I want to make you all aware that a web page is fundamentally made up of three constituents. The first is HTML, the second is CSS or cascading style sheets, and the third is JavaScript. Now HTML will only give the structure of the web page. It has nothing to do with the styling, while CSS is completely responsible for how beautiful your web page looks, what colors you're using as the background, how your images are actually lined up, and all those sorts of things. To learn more about CSS, you can always refer to our CSS tutorial on the same page of Edureka. And thirdly, JavaScript is for making your page much more dynamic. If you're clicking on a button, your posts are being actually submitted. That's all being done by JavaScript. And if you all want to learn about JavaScript, we also have tutorials for that, and you can surely check them out. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create some elements and see how they look like on an HTML page. So let's go back to our HTML page. So this is what an H1 looks like. So let me just copy this down now. And let me show you all the types of headings that HTML provides us. It's actually H1 through H6, so H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. Let's also change them here. H6, H5, H4, H3, 2. Now let's save it. Let's go ahead and reload our page. So this is how the different types of headings look like. This is H1 being the biggest and H6 being the smallest. Okay, so that was about headings. Now we have some other tags also that I want to make you all aware of. So there's a P tag first. So P normally stands for paragraph. Now paragraph is basically what it looks like, and it normally contains random text or paragraphs of your web page. And this is what they look like. So this is what a paragraph looks like. Okay, so that was all about adding a paragraph. So how do you add images? So you can simply add image with the image tag, and all you have to say is a source. Now I already have a beautiful picture of a Pokemon that I really loved as a kid. So let me just copy that down into the folder. Okay, so now that we've copied down our image into our folder, all you have to do is give the source. Now this can be ninetales.png. That's the name of our image. Let's go back to our page. Let's reload it. Okay. Now you can also put in attributes like height, and you could say the height is going to be 7 or 500 pixels, and then you can also put in an attribute called width and say that's also going to be 500 pixels. Yeah, so that changes the height and width of your image. You can also make it smaller by saying something like 100 pixels. So let me just show you that. Save it, let's reload it, and yeah, now we have a much smaller Ninetales out there. Now suppose you don't have a picture, you can also put an alt tag. So this will say there was supposed to be an image here. So let's save that. Now you will not be able to see the alt tag because our image is working, but suppose I misspelled the name of my image, and now you'll see something like that out there. So there was supposed to be an image out here, so it's showing the alternate thing. Right, we can also have line breaks in our HTML. So you do that simply by saying /br, and then there will be a line break between this word 𝐿𝐴MCO and laborious. So let's save that. Let's cancel this out. Okay, so now 𝐿𝐴MCO and laborious are on different lines. We can also make stuff bold. So suppose you want to make this first word bold, so you can go B/B, and that'll make it bold. Yep, now lorem is bold. You can also, for making things bold, you can use a strong tag, and now let's say this is also bold, and now this is also bold, comes up right there. Then you can change the size of text. So let's just create some other text so that it doesn't get cluttered up. So we have tags like big, and we also have tags like small. So let me just show you the difference. This text is big, while this is small. Let's do that. So this text is big while this is small. So let me just put a line break here. Save that. Let's also put a line break here, and now let's put back our image. Yeah, this text is big while this is small. Now you can also put in horizontal lines inside your HTML. All you have to say is HR, and that'll put in horizontal line out there, right like that. You can also put the width and height out here. So width, there's no reason to put a height because it's not there, and width is going to be something like 70%. You could say 70%, and you have a line that goes 70% through the screen. Next, we can also put in links into our HTML. So suppose you want to go to a site. So let's say you want to go to Edureka. Now we can put some text like, say, this is a link to a website. Let's save that. Let's put it here. And now this will take us to edureka.co. Yep, so that's how it works. You can also put links on images. So suppose we were to remove this text out here, copy this image from here, and just put it out here. Now if we were to click on the image, it'll take us to edureka.co. Okay. You can also add lists into your HTML page. So there are two types of lists. One is an ordered list. So ordered lists are numbered lists, and you can put in list items like this. So let's put in a bunch of list items. Okay, so let's type in some text. So this is a random list. So list items are actually going to be the things that you're going to list out. So these could be anything that you're listing out. You could list out your favorite dogs, you could list out your favorite chocolates, or anything like that. Let me just show you what that looks like. Let's go back to our page, and this is what it looks like. So as you guys can see, we have a list out here which says this is a random list, this is a random list, and just to make it a little more creative, let's go and put in some stuff like that. So firstly, let's put an H2 out here. These are some of my favorite dogs. Let's say I love Samoyeds. I also love corgis. I love huskies, and I also love golden retrievers. So now we'll have an actually good list out here. So these are some of my favorite dogs. Now if I were to just make this an unordered list, so we could also have unordered lists. So this is how you create an unordered list. You just go UL and then you put in your list items. So I'm going to say, so let's put in H2 again, and these are some of my favorite heroes in Dota 2. So list item, this is going to be, let's see, I really love playing Shadow Fiend. Then let's put in some other heroes like Storm Spirit, Invoker, and let's say Templar Assassin. Let's save that, and let's see. So these are some of my favorite heroes in Dota 2. Now if you see, our H2 is kind of indented. That is because we have put it inside our list. Now if you were to just cut it out and put it outside, let's reindent my lines, and let's see. So now it's properly showing. So these are some of my favorite heroes in Dota 2. You can also put in images in these list items. So suppose we were to put in some images of Shadow Fiend, Storm Spirit, you would just put an image out here and you would put the source. Now I don't really have images, but you can also put in the URL of images. So let me just show you how to do that. So let's say Shadow Fiend. Let's go into the images. Let's find something small, like let's say 300 x 300. Okay, so this looks like a nice cartoonish figure. So we open this image in a new tab and we copy down this link. So you can say the source is this link. Let's save it. Let's see if it shows up. Yep, and now this thing shows up just outside Shadow Fiend. You can also put in some styling or some attributes, like you'd say width is going to be 100 pixels and height is going to be 100 pixels. So let's save that now, and now it's a much smaller image of Shadow Fiend. Now we have other types of tags also. So these are called div tags. So div tag stands for division. So to divide your page into separate parts, you could say this will contain the footer. So footer tags are normally coming in the end. Now you could also have a div tag in the beginning, and this could contain the header. So these tags will contain the header. This is, so let me just put in some header. So this is the header and this is the footer. So this is the header, headers always come on top, and this is the footer. Now you can also create forms using HTML, so let's go ahead and create one. So our form is going to be called a registration form. Okay, so now let's put our form in a div first of all. So let's give our div an ID. So IDs and classes are actually used to select stuff on an HTML page when you're styling. So to understand more about IDs, check out our CSS tutorial. Let's give this ID form, or registration form rather. Then let's go into our div and create a form. Our form will always stay inside our form tags. Now that we have done that, let's understand the elements of a form. Firstly, we need an input. So first input will be of type text. Let's say its name is going to be first name, and we'll have a placeholder like something like this, say aria, and we will always be requiring it. So if you say required, that means somebody will, if he's actually inputting stuff into the form, this is a mandatory field. Okay, so let's save that and see. So now we have a registration form called aria. Okay, so we also need labels, so let's go ahead and create one. So label, so for first name, and this is going to say first name, and it's going to have a colon. So now there's a label called first name. Now we can do this for last name also. So let's Control C, Control V. So it's going to be last, it's going to be last, and this is also going to be last, and we want to put a placeholder for Paul, and this is also a required field. So now we have a last name with this placeholder. We can submit stuff into that. Now form also takes in two important attributes I forgot to mention. So one is the action and the other is the method. Now action is something that will happen when you submit this form, so you can run a script, something like script.php, but for now that's for another session. Okay, now there are other types of inputs, so let's see, let's create another div. Now suppose you want to input the gender also. So let's see, let's first create a label, and let's also create an input type. So input will be type of radio, and this is going to be called gender male, and let's also give us a value of choice 1. Save it. Now you want a label and you want to give it the attribute for, and you want to give it the name out here. So let's put in that. So gender male, save that, and let's write male out here. So let's save that now and let's see what it looks like. So now we have this thing called male. We can check it and we can uncheck it. Now let's create for female also and others. So let's see, let's call this female, and this is going to be of type choice 2. Now we have male, we have female, but if you see, we can actually select both of them or all of them, so that's not something we want, right? So let's make this choice 3, let's make this other. Okay, now we have a gender submission going on, so male, or it's female, or it's other. Now we can't really select everything, so how do we actually solve that? So let's give them all the same name. So we can call it gender choice, save it. Now you either go male, or you go female, or you go other. You can't really select the same thing. So that's how you make that happen. Okay, now let's look into some other types of input types we can take in. So let's create another div. Suppose you want to take in the email address. So let's go ahead and copy that. Let's put it out here. Let's say, so label for, let's see, first of all we need to change this type to email, and we will also give this a name of email. Let's put in a placeholder instead of a value, and it's going to be something like, let's put xyz@email.com. Okay, now we have this thing going on, so let's change this label to email, and let's change this label to email too. Now we have this thing going, and we can type in our email, and we'll also need to type in a password for registrations. Let's call this password. Let's also make this password. The type is going to be password. And let's remove a placeholder because passwords don't really have placeholders. Save that, and now you see when you type in a password you can't really see anything. That's how you make a form that inputs a password. Okay, so that was how you take in emails and passwords in a form. Now there's some other stuff that I want to show you, so let's dive right into that. So let's create another div. Okay, so first of all we need a select tag. So select tags are used for making selections. So let me show you how that works. So firstly let's give this a name and let's call this birthday, or let's call this the month. Now we'll also need a label for this. Let's create a label. So our label is for the month. Let's call it birthday. Now our select can have various options. So you're basically going to put in a bunch of options out here. Let's see, option. Now we need 12 options actually. That's 3, that's 6, that's 9, that's 12. Delete these out. Just read in my lines. Now our options are gonna have values. So our value will be something like, fine, so let's say Jan, Feb, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, and December. And you could say January out here, February. Let me just create this quickly. March. Let's save this. Now let's see what this looks like. So we have this birthday thing and it has all the months in there. Okay, now out here if you see, it already counts with the default value of January. Now you can also mitigate that by putting in another option called default. So let's put another option, or so now that we have an option, let's give this a value 0 and let's say selected disabled. Now if you reload this, there's nothing, but you get all these different values. Now instead of just making it blank, you could say that this could say month. So now this says month, and you could create something similar for days also. So for days you need to create 30 of these, and I hope you get the logic of creating this thing. Now our form also needs a button to submit, so let's go and create that. Also let me show you another type of input. So let's say input, and the type will be check box, and the name will be agree. And let's put a label for this, a for agree, and I agree to all the conditions of the form. Now we will have this thing going, and we have a checkbox. We could check it, we could uncheck it, something like that. Then all we need is an input. Not an input, we rather need a button. Say button, and you say submit, and you also have to give this a type. So this is going to be of type submit. So once that's done, we see this button and we can submit it. So if you go and submit, you'll see please fill out this field because it's a required field. And that's all that is there, the forms. So that's how you create a form in HTML. You can also create tables in HTML, so let me show you how to do that. Let's reload and make this blank, save it. Yeah, so our tables are created with table tags. Your table, and tables have table datas. Okay, so we can also create tables in HTML. For that we need the table tag. Now table comes with the table header first of all. So this will contain all your table headers. So suppose you are creating a table for dogs and the breed. So th dog, and you can say the dog also has a name and breed. So this has created a table header now. So let me just show you what that looks like. So now we have the dog name and breed. Now we can just simply go in and put in some table rows. So for the row you say tr, and in every row you will have to put in some table data. So for that you use a table data tag, so TD. So let's say our dog is called, so let's make this rather dog owner name, right? So I had a dog and my dog's name was Stoner. Let's call him Stoner. And Stoner was a street dog, so let's just keep the breed as street. Okay, so that was one table row. Save it. Now we'll be needing multiple table rows, so let's just copy that, paste it multiple times. So let's say my friend Shubham, he has a dog called Goldie and it's a retriever. And then I also have this friend called Ayushman. He has a dog called Duke and it's husky. And then there's this guy called Ishan. He has a dog called Monster, but it's a pug. Yeah, so now we have successfully created a table, and you guys can see dog owners are Arya, Shubham, Ayushman, and Ishan. Their name of their respective dogs are Stoner, Goldie, Duke, and Monster, and the breeds are Street, Retriever, Husky, and Pug. So that's how you create a table. Now with CSS you can add a border to this table. So let me just show you how that's done with a little bit of CSS. So let's say style, let's say text/CSS. Now out here you could just do some little styling. Let's give our table a border of 1px solid black. Now our table will have a border, and we can also give TDs a border, and they're gonna have 1px solid black too. So now everything has a border and our table looks much neater. Yep, so that's how you create a table in HTML. Okay guys, so now it's time I actually show you how HTML can be really polished sometimes. So let's go ahead and create a blog. So for this blog I've already created the CSS out here. So I'm not really going to be explaining the styling part, but we are going to be creating our blog. So let's go ahead and see how that looks like. So first of all, let's delete everything. Let's create a page now. So let's call this blog. Now we'll be linking our style sheet out here. So for linking our style sheet, all you have to say is something like this, and then we go ahead and copy my style sheets. The desktop, we're doing our stuff in HTML demo. Let's copy this here. Right. Now our blog.css is going to be here. Now let's go and start creating our blog. So firstly, let's put everything inside a div. Now this is going to have a class called post because I've used the class to actually style some stuff. Now that's done, so let's have another div. So this is going to have a class called date, and we're going to be putting in the date. So let's say our date is going to be October 24th 2018. Now let's say we have a heading, so let's say Vancouver, my favorite city. Then let's put in some paragraphs because every article needs a paragraph. So for paragraphs you're just going to be filling it with some lorem ipsum. Now our paragraph will have a class called quote. Okay, now let's reload and see what is being made. Okay, so if you guys can see, our blog post is coming up. Now we can also add some images to our blog post. So let's add a link first. So we link to https www.edureka.co. Now we are going to use an image for actually making it clickable. So we already have an image. It's called image1.jpg. So that's there. Let's also put an alt tag out here just in case this doesn't load up. So alt and say Vancouver image. Now let's put in some another paragraphs. So another lorem ipsum and some more paragraphs, I guess, because this is a blog, so let's make it look like a blog. Save that, and let's also give it a horizontal line to make it look neat. Save this. Let's load it. Okay, so we have this nice looking article and it has this image. If we click on this image, it'll take us to Edureka's site. So we go to Edureka if we click that image. Let's add another article into this just to make it a little longer. So let's copy down this div. So let's change the date first, because let's say we posted on the next day. Let's change the title, so my second blog post. Save it. Let's remove the image from this one to make it a little different. Yeah. So now if you see, we have this nice looking blog post going on. It has this horizontal line. We have some quote out here, and that's how you can do stuff with HTML. So what exactly is CSS? Well, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets and is generally used to control how HTML tags and elements are displayed on your screen. So this means basic styling of your web page is controlled by CSS. Now, CSS was actually made to solve problems that were introduced in HTML 3.2. Now, HTML 3.2 got in some new attributes like font color, background color, which generally was pertaining to styling of an element on a web page. Now, while this did add some very needed functionality into HTML 3.2, it cluttered up your code as a developer and made your life pretty miserable. So to keep the structure of your web page, which is the HTML, and to make the styling a different aspect, CSS was made by W3C. So W3C stands for the World Wide Web Consortium, and CSS till date is still being maintained by the W3C developers. Okay, so that was a general introduction to CSS. Now let's move ahead. So this is the basic syntax of CSS. You basically have selectors, which selects or targets the place that you want to attach your styling to. Then you have basic properties and value pairs. Now you can include your CSS into your HTML with a link tag while putting the href attribute as the file name. Or you can do some inline CSS, but that's not actually recommended because that's the problem that we are actually trying to mitigate by putting CSS as a different file. Also, if you don't want to create another CSS file, you can do some internal CSS by putting in some style tags in your head tag and just writing some normal CSS to it. Okay, so now let's see the different types of CSS selectors. So these are all the different types of CSS selectors, and basically a selector is a way of targeting an element on a web page. So the star selector selects all the elements and applies the CSS that you would apply to it. And then if you would say div, then it would apply your CSS to all the divs. Now div comma p will apply to all the divs and paragraphs. Div space p will put your styling to all the paragraphs inside divs. Now going through all the CSS selectors is a pretty cumbersome job, so I recommend that you go through this page on W3 Schools, which has all the different types of selectors and the different types of pseudo selectors all listed out. So this will very much help you when you're doing your own CSS, so always keep this page open. Now just for basic sake, let me just tell you about pseudo selectors. So we also have pseudo selectors, which is defined something like this. So pseudo selectors include stuff like hover, active, visited, and stuff like that. Now suppose you were hovering over an A tag, so you can say there is supposed to be some specific styling when you're hovering over it. So how would you do that? You would just say A:hover, and then you would actually specify the styling that you want. Now you can also find all these types of pseudo selectors out here, and it's all listed out here. So A visited, like select all visited links, something like that. Now I also want to make you all aware of the box model that is very much used in CSS. Now box model has four things: the content, padding, border, and margin. So content is the basic content of the web page that you want to show to your general audience. Then the padding is the space between your border and the content itself. The border is a line that can be of any size, color, and width. And then there's a margin, which is this distance from the edge of the screen to the border. Okay, and now the box model looks something like this. So the content comes in between, then comes the padding, which is between the border and the content, and then there's the margin, which is between the screen and the border itself, the screen edge and the border, right? So that's how the box model works. Now the last bit of basics is the CSS units. So there are four kinds of units. Firstly, we have the pixel. So pixel represents any pixel on a device. So you could say something like font size is equals to 25 pixels, so it'll make it actually 25 pixels. Then there's also points, which is mostly used in print media. And all you need to remember to use points correctly, that 72 points equals 1 inch. Now the last two types of units are relative units. Now these are relative to your current font size. So 1 EM or 100% is actually equals to your current font size. So if you want something to be double your font size, all you have to say is 2 EM. So these are how relative units work in CSS. Okay, so that was all the basics of CSS and how you select stuff and all the units. Now let's get ahead and code some of our own CSS. So for this time, I've actually created a bunch of HTML pages, and we're going to style these HTML pages by adding some CSS into them, and this will stand as good practice for CSS alone. Okay, so for the first page, we have this page called page1.html, and it's a pretty basic page. Let me just open it up and show it to you guys. So this is what it looks like without any sort of CSS being attached to it. Now we're going to create some CSS, and we're going to try and practice, first of all, selecting stuff in different ways possible. Okay, so firstly, let's do some very random CSS. Okay, firstly, let's target all the divs in this HTML. So how would you actually do that? Well, you'd say div by going selectors, and let's actually save this as a CSS file first so that our syntax is colored properly. Okay, so that's a div. So that's how you select any element in CSS. Now suppose we were to say background color, or rather just background, it'll be purple, and the text or the color of the text will be white. So now everything inside a div will look like that. So now let's just save this as page1. As it's saved as page1.css, let's reload our page. And everything that is inside the div now has a white text, and it also has a purple background. Okay, now let's see how we actually select IDs. So we select IDs with the hash. So we have an ID called quote out here, if you go and see. So where is that thing gone? Okay, so this paragraph out here that you see has the ID called quote. So we're going to select that and put in some of our own CSS. So let's see. Now that we've selected our ID, we can say, suppose we want to change the font family. So we could say font family is Verdana, and you could also put in alternate font families just in case Verdana doesn't exist in your system, like Gil Sans. Fine. So that's how you set up your font family. Let's also set the color to be black. Let's see what changes now. So this is the code that I was talking about. So that font should change now. Let's reload. Oh yes, now the font has become Verdana, and that's what we exactly wanted. And the text is also black now. Okay, so how do we select classes now? So if you go here and see, we should have a class called movies. Right. So all these have a class called movie, all these A tags. So let's select them. First of all, to select a class, you say dot, and then you say the class name. Now, we could put in some random CSS into this again. So let's make the color, let's keep it white, and let's make the background steel blue. Let's see. So where are our movies? Let's see where the movies actually exist. Oh yeah, Dota, Splinter Cell, and God of War. These are the movies, so these should now change. Let's save it. And now they have a background color of steel blue, and they have a text color of white. And that's exactly what we defined out here. Fine. Now let's try out some other kinds of selectors. So suppose in the span out here, we have this ID called author. So what if we only want to target that? What would we say? So we could say span and hashtag author. Now you could put any type of CSS. So let's say text transform. So this is how you transform any sort of text, and you could say uppercase. Now the author will be changed to uppercase out here, and this is the author, the Pope Alexander part. Now watch that. Now it's just uppercase, and we have selected it with this selector called span and hashtag author. We can also do some other kinds of selecting. Let me just show it to you. So we could select the LIs of the unordered list or the ordered list. So our skills is the ID. This is the ID of skills. So let's select them now. So we have skills, and we could go the ordered list and then the LI. And what we want to say out here is the color will be purple. We can do the same thing for the unordered list too. Let me just copy that down, put this here, say unordered list, and let's say we change the text color to white. Save that. Let's reload our page. So wait, first of all, let me uncomment this. Now let's save it again, reload our page, and see the differences. Now since we had given it a purple color, it's now all purple, and let me just put a background of white so that you can see it. Yeah, now these are purple and these are background white. We can do the same for the unordered list too. Let me just uncomment that. Let me also give it a background of purple, or actually let it be like that. Let's just make it blue. Now SAS and Haml have turned into blue, as you see out here. This is the blue thing. Fine. Now that was selectors. Okay, now let's go ahead and select some other stuff. So what if we want to select all the paragraphs that are after the h3 tag? So if you remember, we can do that by saying h3 plus p, and let's say we want a background of black and some text color that is white. So color white. Not being very creative with my CSS at this moment because this is just about selecting. So let's see how that reloads. Yep, now we have a color of white and a background of black. And that only selected the paragraph just after the h3, which is my favorite video games. Okay, we can also select every paragraph that has a class by just saying something like p and class. We don't even need to specify the color, or I mean the class name. So you go background, let's say we want to give a gray background. Let's see all the paragraphs of the class. So this is the only paragraph with the class. Now you can do the same thing for IDs, just say ID out here, and let's see all the paragraphs with an ID. So this is the only paragraph with an ID. Okay, so now that we're done with selecting stuff, let's go and actually see how text can be transformed with the use of CSS. Fine. So first of all, I already have a page created for that. So this is going to be our page that we are going to use to see how text is transformed. If you see, I have an ordered list with all the types of text transformations or the text stylings that I want to show. And we also have a paragraph out here which will show the basics box elements like the borders, margins, and padding. So I'm going to demonstrate that through this PID out here. Right, so let's get started. First of all, let's create our CSS file, and in the CSS file we're going to save it and we're going to call it page2.css. Right. Then yeah, it's connected as page 2. So let's get started. So first of all, let's target this ID with lorem. So lorem ipsum is just some Latin paragraph that is normally used in web development to fill in spaces with text, where you can always come back and delete that text and fill it with something more meaningful. So for now, we are going to be using this lorem ipsum thing. So it's in a paragraph tag with an ID of lorem. So let's go ahead and select it. So we're going to select it with the help of the ID, call it lorem. Now, first of all, let me just show you what the page looks like without any CSS attached to it. So this is what the page looks like, right? So this is the part that we are going to target right now. First of all, let's give it a background of black. Let's make the color of the text white. Let me show you what that looks like. Okay, right? Now let's give it some borders and padding. So first of all, to give a border, we could say we use the border property, then we give 3 parameters: the type of the border, the size of the border, and then the color. And you do it something like this: 3px solid red. Now apart from solid, there are a lot of types of borders, and those include dashed, dotted, rigged, and many more. These are the ones that are just from the top of my head. So you can try them out, and you can find other types of CSS border just by going to Google and saying CSS border types. So these are all the types of borders that you get, and you can definitely check them out. It's impossible to show everything in one video like that, so let me just show you the solid type. So let's save it and let's see what kind of border we actually get. Let's close this down. Yeah, now we have this neat little border of 3 pixels in size and red in color. Now let me just show you how dotted would look like. So this is what dotted looks like, and this is what dashed looks like. Fine. And this is what dashed is. Okay. Now let's also give this thing some padding. Now padding exists between the content and the border. So I just explained the box model when we were discussing the basics of CSS, so I hope you remember that. So for padding, there are 4 parameters actually: the right, top, left, and bottom. So you can define your padding something like this. You can go 13 pixels, 13 pixels, 13 pixels, and 20 pixels. Now these are just very arbitrary numbers, but what I want to explain is that this first part will mean that there's 13 pixels of padding from the top, and then we move in a clockwise fashion. So this is on the right, this is in the bottom, so 13 pixels of padding in the bottom and 20 pixels of padding on the left. Now you could also say this really easily if you want to give equal amounts of padding, suppose. Now this means that there will be 13 pixels of padding on the top and bottom, and this second part would mean that there's 13 pixels of padding on the left and the right. And if you just put one digit, that means there's 13 pixels of padding all around it. Now let's go and put these different paddings around lorem ipsum. Now it looks much neater. We can also put a margin, so let's put a margin, and the margin also works in the same way. So suppose you were to say 5 pixels, that means it would give a 5 pixel margin all around your content. If you were to put, say, 10 pixels and 20 pixels, this means that 10 pixels of margin on the top and bottom and 20 pixels of margin on the left and right. And there's also another keyword that I want to make you aware of, and that is auto. So what auto does is it gives equal amounts of margin however you specify it. So out here it'll give 10 pixels of margin on the top and bottom and equal amounts of margin on the left and right. So let's see how that works. Yep, so that's how it changed it. Now that was all about the box modeling. So let me just remove this part from the HTML, and let's remove this part from the CSS. Now as you guys can see, I have this ordered list out here. First of all, let me reload the page. Now I have this ordered list out here which shows us all the types of styles and weights and sizes that I'm going to be showing right now, and this will include a lot of the units that we discussed, like ems, points, pixels and percentages. So let's move ahead. So to select these, I'll be using these IDs. So let me just remember the first 4 IDs is normal, italic, oblique and small cap. So let's go ahead and create them. So firstly, let's select our normal ID and say what are we going to try and show here is font style. So all you have to say is font style is normal. So normal basically means that the font style will be normal instead of something bolded. Then I think we had italic, so you go font style italic. Then we also had oblique, so you go font style oblique, and we also had small caps. So let me just see that again. Yep, it's small cap. So you go small cap, and what are we trying to show in small cap is the font variant. So font variant small caps. So let me just reload and see how that changed stuff. Okay, so font style normal just stays normal, while italic and oblique are almost similar. Then in font variant small caps, this is how it would look like, where the first letter has a bigger font size and the rest have a smaller font size, but everything is in capital. And next is the font weight. So let's see the IDs. It's normal, bold, bolder. So let's go with that now. So firstly we have normal. So font size is the size, or weight, it's weight. So font weight will be normal. Next part is bold, bolder, lighter. Okay, so we select bolder like that. We go font weight is bolder, and we can say again, let's what's after bolder, it's bold. Okay, so W bold, and you go font weight is bold. Let's see how that changes stuff. So yeah, bold is bold, and font weight bolder is slightly more bolder, while font weight normal is absolutely normal. Right, time for some more. So the next is the font size, which goes from extra large, large, medium, small, extra, extra small. So let's do that. So first is extra, extra large, and this is the font size that we're talking about. So it's extra, extra large. There's also extra large. So extra, extra large looks something like this, while only extra large looks something like this. Fine. Then we also have large. So font size will be large. So that's font size large. Next we have medium, small and extra, extra small. So medium, small and extra, extra small. So this is going to be font size medium, this is going to be font size small, and this is going to be font size extra, extra small. So let's see how that changes stuff. So this is extra, extra small, this is small, and this is medium. Now the next thing that we're going to see is how points work. So our size is going to be 25 points. So instead of just doing that, let me just change extra, extra small and let's say it's 25 points. You should remember that 1 point is around 2 inches. So that's how font size extra extra small would look like if it was 25 points. Then we could also say the font size is 150%. So that shows us how percentages works, where 100% means the current font size. Look at the change, and that's how 150% means. The next thing that we want to show is line height. So let's say, what is the ID? Let me just check the ID. So the line height IDs are line normal, height 25 points. So let's just select one, line normal, and this is gonna have a line height of normal. Let's put a semicolon, save it up, and that's how line height normal is. That is the normal line height. Now you could say your line height is 25 points, and that's how it would change. Also, you could say your line height is around 25 EM or just 5 EM, let's say that. And that's how it would change even more with EM, with 1 EM being the constant font size that we are using. Or you could say line height is 200%. That is basically twice of what our line height or font is. So that's how it would change, right? So that was all about text styling. Now let's move ahead and see how positioning and stuff takes place in CSS. So for positioning, I have again gone ahead and created this page3.html. So in here we will be including a CSS page called page3.css. So let's go ahead and create that. First of all, we have to set this to CSS, save it as page3, and let's get started. So first of all, we have 3 types of positioning in CSS: absolute, fixed, and relative. So first of all, I'm going to show absolute positioning to you guys. Now before I show absolute positioning, let me just show you guys how text and stuff can be centered first of all. So let's start doing some random CSS. So first of all, we are going to target this ID called container. So let's go hashtag container, and let's go to background, some random color. So for color picker, we just go color picker. Let's give us this background. Go OK. That's the background we chose. Let's also give it some borders. Border will be 2 pixels, solid and black. We can also set up a border radius. So border radius gives you a curved border. So you could say border radius is around 5 pixels, let's say. Now let me just open up the HTML file that is concerned at this moment. So this is page 3. Okay, so this is with some CSS. Now let me just uncomment that CSS first. So this is what our page would look like without any sort of CSS. Now this is what it looks like with the CSS that we just included. Now to make you aware of how box radius works, let me just uncomment that first. Let's comment it out. So box radius should not work, and we should get, yeah, now if you see, let's zoom in out here. You see that this border is pointed. Suppose we don't want that to happen. Let's remove that first, and let's uncomment this, save it, let's reload, and now we have this slight little curved border which looks much neater. Okay, now we can also center stuff. So a neat way to do that is, let me just show it to you. Let's take this part called centered. Now to center it, let me just give it a first background to make it look different. So this background will be, let's say, 89 CFF0. So that's our color. Let's see what our color looks like. So that is the color that we are gonna center. Now let's say our width is gonna be, we can set the width of elements like this. So you say width is 50%. And then you go margin is going to be auto. So what does auto do? It'll put an equal margin on all sides. Let's reload our page. Yep, and now it's centered. We can also center without actually centering the element. We can just center the text by just saying text, align, and center. Fine. Now that will remove the background and just keep the text out here. So that's exactly what we wanted, and that's how you align your text. Okay, now let's move ahead with absolute positioning. Now, absolute positioning means positioning based on the document itself, which means this whole web browser. So a browser is basically the document that you are actually manipulating. So it's called document object manipulation, if you've heard of that term. So let's go ahead and let me just show you how absolute positioning works. So first of all, we have this element called top left, and we're going to try and put it on the top left. So let's select that first. So you go top left. Now let's give it a background. Okay, that'll going to be the background. Let's also give it a border. So let the border be 1 pixel, solid and black. Let's say now to position something with absolute positioning, all you have to say is position is absolute. Now let's also keep the width around 200 pixels and the height also around 200 pixels. Let's save it. Let's see how stuff changes. Let me just zoom out. Yeah, so that is our element. So this is what top left and bottom right is going to look like. Now we are going to try and select this element and put it in the bottom right of this parent. So let me just show you how that is done. So to select that, I've already created an ID for it and it's called bottom right. Let me give it a background of white, and you say the position is absolute. Now we want to change the position to actually inside the element, so we have to say it's going to be 0 pixels from the bottom and also 0 pixels from the right. So since it has absolute positioning, it's going to position this inside of this. So first of all, let's give it a background of white and also make the color black. Right, and now we have this right where we want it. Now there's also something called the Z index. So Z index is what comes first on your screen basically. So if you have multiple things that are stacked on top of each other with absolute positioning, the one with the most Z index will be the one that is shown on top. So you can set a Z index like this and say the Z index is 5. So anything with a Z index of 4 will actually come underneath this thing, right? So that was all about absolute positioning. Now let's go ahead and do some fixed positioning. So for fixed positioning, we have this ID called fixed, which contains a paragraph saying I'm staying right here. So let's select that first. Let me just remove all this stuff so that it's not cluttered anymore. Let me reload the page, save it, reload it, and that's how. So I'm staying here. First of all, this is what it's going to change. Fixed positioning, right? Is that what we called it? Fixed position, okay. Now first of all you have to say is position is going to be fixed. Now let's make it more prominent by giving it a background of black and a text color of white. So let's see, this has become black and position is fixed. Whatever I do, if I'm scrolling, it just stays there. It doesn't really matter what I do to this thing. Okay, so that was all about fixed positioning. Now the next thing that we're going to see is relative positioning. So for that, I already have 2 elements created. So let's say these are the divs, which says this is going to be relative. So relative positioning, as I was just saying, is positioning based on the relative position of the element. So let me just show you. So relative 1. Now let's go to background first. So let's just select some color. Let's make this green out here. Okay, that's gonna be our color. Let's give it a border of 1 pixel solid black, and let's say the height is gonna be around 100 pixels. Now we're gonna select another element and position it relative to this element. Okay, so that is this element right out here is gonna be relative to. So to set something with the position of relative, all we have to say that the position is relative, and the rest of the CSS is just arbitrary. So let's say left, not padding left. So you want to position it somewhere left of it, and the positioning is going to be relative. So 20 pixels from the original positions, 20 pixels to the left from the original position, I mean. And you could say from the top it would be around 30 pixels. You could also say negative 30 pixels to move it the other way around. Let's give it a background. I'm already given it the background. Okay, let's give it a background of yellow. So you say background equals yellow, and you could also give it a border and say 1px solid blue. Let's get a blue background. Okay, so this relative layout is going to be positioned relative to this thing. Fine, let's just reload and see. Yep, and that's how relative positioning works. Now this might just not look neat at this moment, but I'm trying to drive a point home. Fine. Okay, now let me just see if I have dog.jpg. Okay, there's a PNG file called Edureka. So let me just show you something cool. First of all, let me just remove everything from here. Okay, so now that our things are less cluttered, and let me just rename this now to the image that is already there. So edureka.png and edureka.png. Fine, let's save this. Let's see what our page looks like now. So this is what it looks like. Now you can float stuff like images to the left and right. So let's just select the image tag, and suppose you say float them to the right. These will float everything to the right. Now that's how you position stuff or images, with the float tag. So I guess that was all about positioning of stuff. Now let's move ahead. Okay, so in this part we are going to be learning about overflows. So for overflows, what we can do, let's go back to page2.html, and we have this text out here, or this unordered list, and this list is pretty big, right? First of all, let's open up a new page, or rather let's open up okay, wait, let me just close these out. So let's save this as page2.css, or rather let's just call it something new. First of all, let's set this to CSS, right? Let's save it, and let's call it overflow. Now what I want to show you guys is something really cool. So let's select the ordered list. So that's what we're going to select. Let's say it has width of around 100 pixels. It has some padding from the top, and right, so let's get some padding of 10 pixels and 10 pixels all around rather. Let's give it a margin of 100 pixels and auto, so we'll bring it right to the center. Let's see, so it was page 2 that we're fiddling around with. So this is page2.html. Now let me just replace this with overflow.css. Let's see now. Yeah, so this is what it looks like. Now if you see, to scroll through this list is quite cumbersome because you have to actually scroll like this. Let's give it a background also. Background is going to be black, as I just love black, and the color of our font is going to be white. See how that changed? Yep, so this is what it looks like. Now what if you do and say max height is equals to 500, or rather only 200 pixels. Yeah, so that doesn't really do much. So if you say overflow is auto, you get a scrolling bar. Or you could say overflow is scroll. Let's remove this max height. Now you see we have these little scroll bars out here, and that's what exactly overflow does. It's basically shows us the items and you can scroll through them. Yeah, basically like that. So if you were to say that the width is only suppose 50 pixels, let's say, make this even smaller. Yeah, so that's how now you have this little scroll bar that lets you scroll through stuff. So that's how overflow works. Okay, now let's look at some pseudo selectors or some pseudo classes that we can select and style. So first of all, let me open up the page that is going to be responsible for that. So we have this page out here that I've created. Now it also has some new tags that you might be seeing. These are some HTML5 tags. So header tag, nav tags, and then the main tag. These are just some new tags that you see in HTML5, and you can also target them through CSS3. So targeting them is pretty easy, but what I want to show is something pretty cool. Let's save it first. Let's create a new page. Let's call it CSS. Right, so let's save this first as page5.css. Okay, so now it's time to practice some more CSS, and we'll be doing it on this page that I've created. So this page is kind of a big page, to be honest. It has quite a lot of paragraphs, quite a lot of links, a few images also, I guess. And they use a lot of the HTML5 tags that have been newly introduced, like the header tag, the nav ID, or the nav tag, the main tag. We have section tags, and a lot of other tags like these. Now these tags can also be selected with the help of, let's say, CSS3. That's what we are learning. Okay, now let me just remove this part because we won't be needing that. Now let's go ahead and save our content, and let me just show you what this actually looks like on the web page. So let's go ahead and open up page 5, and this is what it looks like on a web browser rather, without any CSS attached to it. So let's transform this thing with the help of some CSS. So firstly, we've created this page called page5.css, and we've already attached it to this page out here with the link tag and the href attribute. Now let's get started. So first of all, let me just actually make use of some pseudo selectors. So we have already discussed pseudo selectors while going over the basics. Now let me just show you how they work. So a hover is going to target all the a links while we are hovering over them. Now when we are hovering over them, we want the background to become black and text to become white. Right, so let's save it, let's reload. Now if we hover over these, the background becomes black and the text becomes white. Right, now the same thing can be done with a lot of other selectors, like this is active. So when you click on a link, that means it's going to turn like that. So let's save it, let's reload our page first of all. Now you see when we hover, nothing happens, but once we click it, it becomes that black and white kind of thing. Right, we can also do this for visited, and that will actually change the link once it's been visited. So if we go and do this, open link in new tab, well, it's not working out here, but if there was actually a database connected, you would actually see this to them. Now suppose we want to select our body. Let's give it a background first of all. Get out the color picker. Let's give it a nice green background. Okay, now that's going to be our background for the body. Now we also have a div with the ID of wrapper. So let's go ahead and select that first. So we say wrapper. Now let's give it some CSS. So we're going to say margin is going to be 0 and auto. Now whenever you say 0, you do not need to actually specify the units, so we can just do that. We'll give it a background color of white, then we'll give it a width of around 800 pixels. We'll give it a height of around 1000 pixels. Okay, now let's save that and let's see what it looks like now. So this is what it has turned to. Now we can also do some more stuff. So let's select some HTML5 elements like the header tag, and let me just show you that CSS still works as we want it to. So let's give it some simple padding, around 0 pixels on the top, 0 pixels on the right, and we want to give some 10 pixels on the bottom and 0 pixels on the left too. See what changes? Now we got that little change. We can also select stuff like with the IDs as I just showed you. Now let's select the navigation, which has the ID of horse nav. Let me just check if I'm right. Yep, it's called horse nav with the N being capital. Now we can say stuff like, so there's also the display attribute. This shows how elements will be displayed. Now they can be blocked or inline block, which means it'll be converted into an inline element. Now we could say display is blocked. And you could just give it some background just to make it more apparent. So let's give it a background color of black and make the color white. Let's see. Yep, that's how it's selected. Now you can also give pseudo tags like this one out here, like visited, to IDs too. So let's say once we're hovering over the nav bar, we want this to happen. So let's save it. Now if we only hover over it, will the change happen? So that's how that works. Now let's go over and see some word spacing. Now word spacing is used for mostly specifying the words. So let me just remove some stuff from here. First of all, let's remove all this. Right, let's remove the header tags, and we just need this part where we have all these paragraphs. So I'll be targeting the first paragraph to show you all word spacing. So it's going to be this one out here, right here. Fine, let's save it. Go ahead here, reload the page. Now this is what it looks like. Let's remove everything that we have already created, and let's just select para 1. I hope that's what it was called out here. So it is called para 1 indeed. Now we can go word spacing and just say, let's give it 10 pixels between the words. Right, so the spacing between these words in this paragraph should change now. Now that we've saved it, let's go ahead and reload. So yeah, now you can see that the word spacing for this out here is much more different. Now we can also do letter spacing the same way. So let's select paragraph 2 for that. So for letter spacing, all we have to say is letter spacing, and then we could say something like 10 pixels. Now this will specify the letters and how they're spaced. Now you can see it looks, this horrible thing is having 10 pixels of letter spacing. It also put some word spacing into this, so let's see how that looks like. Let's put word spacing of 20 pixels and make this even more ugly. Yep, so that's what it would look like with word spacing and letter spacing. So that was just for experimentation purposes, and you can use that whenever you feel free to. Okay, so another property that I want to make you all aware of that is in CSS is a clear property. So the clear property makes sure that nothing actually appears before it. So in this case, the footer tag, which is right about here, which says only the copyright part. Now it is shown here. This is the footer tag that we are talking about. So we want to say something like, let's say, so you can say clear and both. So that's how you specify clears. Okay, so let's get a background color of black. Let's also say the color of the text will be white, just to make it a bit more prominent. Yeah, so nothing actually appears before that. So that's how you use clear now. So there's also style types, also list style types. So let me just see. We have these lists out here, first of all, which says random 1, 2, 3, random 1, 2, 3. Now, let's say, first of all, let's convert this into an unordered list. So find all, let's gonna replace that with unordered list. Right. I just want to show it with unordered list first. So let's say, let's select all the ULs and let's say list style is gonna be none. Now if you see out here, we have these bullet points and now we don't. Okay, so you can also do these with ordered lists. So let's go back and let's do control and UL, find all. Let's select them, let's make them OLs, ordered lists. Let's see. Now OL doesn't work with list type none, if you just realized. Now we can do something like alpha, lower alpha. So let's see that, how that works. Okay, so for lower alpha we have to say list style type. Please remember that, that was my mistake right now. Okay, if you have to select the OLs again. Now you see that we have these list types that is saying with small caps. Now there are other stuff like lower Latin, there's also lower Latin, so let me just show you what that looks like. Save it. Okay, that doesn't really change because I don't think I have Latin installed, but we can also go Greek. There's a bunch of stuff that you can do. It's pretty fun. So I have Greek installed, now it goes alpha, beta, gamma instead of ABC. And that's how you can change stuff. You can also change the position of the list style. So list style position, you could say outside. So let's see what that means. And doesn't really change much out here, but that's one of the properties that I just wanted to show. Okay, now you can also place contents before an element. So let me just show you how to do that. Let's clear all of these things now. So let's say we want to select par1 and say, so this is going to be a pseudo selector again. So you say after, you say content, and your content is gonna be, let's say, at the rate. So all these at the rates are gonna be before this little thing out here. So let me just show you the change. Yep, so since we said after, it has all these at the rates after, but if we say before, this is how it'll change. So now it's all before them. Right. Okay, now let's go ahead and see how we can use the nth child elements. So for that, we're going to select our UL again. Actually, let me go ahead and delete everything first of all. Okay, so let me create another HTML boilerplate, and this is going to be called list. First of all, let's say we have an unordered list with a bunch of list items. So LIs all around. Let me just copy that down and paste it a few times. Right, so now we have all these list items here. Let's just fill them up with some random text. Okay, so let's just say something random like cats. So let's save this, let's go out here. Now we have these things called cats. Okay, so what if we want them to have alternate paragraphs? I mean alternate background colors. So first of all, let's go ahead and select the LIs and give them a background. Let's say this gray color that I have selected, F7, F7, F7. Now you see we have, okay, this doesn't seem to be working. LIs. Looks like I've deleted my link tag, that's why the CSS was not working. So let's see. Now we have that. Okay, so first of all, let's go back and change this to F7, 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 right? This will give it this gray color that you see out here. Let's also give it the width of around 360 pixels. So that'll bring it there. Let's also give it a margin of 100 pixels from the top and equal on the side. Let's bring it to the center. Right, now suppose you want to say li nth child, and you could say something like 2n. So this will select all the even childs, and you could say they have a background color of white. So let's see how that changes things for us. Now you see that all these things out here have an alternating background color where it's gray, white, gray, white, gray, white, and that's how you select all the even childs. Now you can also select the first child by saying first child. For that we do not really need this 2n counter, and now only the first is black. You could also say last child, and now the last will be white. And that's how stuff changes with CSS. Okay. Now you can also change the first line, so let's go ahead and change our HTML up a bit. So let's create a paragraph, and it's gonna have some lorem ipsum in it. So let me just show you something really cool. Let's delete all of this stuff. Let's select our paragraph, and we're gonna say the pseudo selector called first line, and let's say text transform uppercase. So let's reload that. First of all, let me just comment this out just to show you what the page looks like without any CSS. So this is our page without any CSS, and let me uncomment this now, save it, and there you go. The first line has been completely made uppercase. Now instead of first line, you could also say last line, and that will transform the last line to uppercase. You could also say something like first letter. And okay, so just to show you that it does indeed work, let me just reload this without any CSS first. Okay, now you see that the lorem ipsum begins with the lowercase l. Now let me just uncomment this out, save it, and now you see that the first thing is a capital. You could also change it to say stuff like text size, or rather font size, and say around 100 pixels. Now the first letter will be 100 pixel big, and that's how you can do stuff like that. Okay, so another thing is you can also change the pointer or the cursor. So let's see, when you're hovering over a paragraph, let's say P and hover, first of all we want the background to become black, we also want the color to become white, and we want the cursor to become pointer. So let's see, so when you're hovering over it, it becomes this hand-like thing, and when you go out it comes back to normal. So that's how you can change the cursor also. Now let me show you all something called a box shadow first of all. So let's remove this cursor part. So without the cursor it looks something like this. Let's remove the hover tag so that's always there. Right. Okay, now let's also change this to that gray color that I really like, and let's also change this to black. So this is what it looks like now. Let's give it a width of around 400 pixels. So this is what it looks like. Now let's also center it so that I can show you some cool stuff. So margin, let's say 0 and auto. So this is going to center it from the top of the screen. Now that it's centered, okay, so this is what our thing looks like. Now suppose we were to give it a border. So borders are really neat. So 2px solid black. So this is what a border looks like. But there are other stuff also, like a box shadow. So this is how box shadow works. Takes 3 parameters, so one is z, x and y axis, and not really in that order, it's x, y and z axis, and then it also takes a color. So let me just show you how that happens. So suppose we say 0x, 0y, and let's say 3 pixels on the z axis, rather 5 pixels to make it more prominent, and then it takes an RGBA of 0. We want to make it really invisible, so 0.5, so that gives it a half opacity. Now you can see this really neat little shadow going all across our content. So that is what box shadow does. It's a neat little trick for when you don't want to use a border or something like that. Now other than borders, there's also outline. Let's say an outline is black in color. So outline completely negates our box shadow, and you could also say outline equals none. So let's remove that now because box shadow looks really neat. Yep. Okay, so now let's talk about text decorations. So since we have some text already going up, let's decorate it. Now there are a few kinds of text decoration that I want to show. So the text decoration, let's say. So first say is line through. Just put a line through all of the content. So now it's all strike through. You can also say something like overline or underline. So let's see that. Underline will underline our text. Yep. And overline, as you might have guessed, will overline our text. Now everything has a line on top of it. Fine. Now we can also set the visibility of our text or any other tag, to be honest. Visibility. So let's check out all the other visibilities that are there. So to do that, always go on Google and type visibility and CSS, and let's see the visibility property and how it goes. So you must understand that knowing everything in CSS is kind of impossible. So you should always have a go-to or a backup. So my backup is normally W3 School, and they have everything regarding CSS and its properties. These are all the properties that you want to go through, and I'm mostly going through the most important ones in this tutorial that you may use in your day-to-day projects and topics. But sometimes you might need the rare ones like counter reset, empty cells, flex spaces, and all these stuff. And you can always go back to W3 Schools and go through them. Now you can say visibility is visible or something like that, and it should make it visible. Yeah. Right. So that was all about the miscellaneous types of CSS that we were handling. Now let's go ahead and see some gradients and how we can create some beautiful gradients using CSS. Okay. Now before we move on to gradients, let me just show you some white spaces or some more text transformations. Right. So I already showed you all these text transformations. There's capitalize, there's lowercase, there's overline, line through, uppercase, and underline. Now capitalize will just capitalize it. So I don't think I'm going to show that to you guys. Now let's close these two pages out here. Let's create our new CSS file, and first of all let's set this to CSS. Let's save it, and let's say it's going to be page6.css. Now out here, if you see, we have a bunch of white spaces, right? Now let's see how you can handle white spaces using CSS. So there is a thing called the ID called whitespace pre. I think that's exactly what it's called, whitespace pre. Yep. Let's select that, and you could say whitespace is pre. Let's see how that changes stuff. So first of all, let me load up page 6 for you guys. Right, let's remove the CSS, save it, let's reload it again, and what we are actually targeting is this spot. White space will be preserved. Right, so white space will be preserved. Now go ahead, uncomment that, save it, and let's reload. Now see, the white spaces that are in the HTML is preserved. Now white spaces can also be handled in other ways. So there are two things that I want to show. So let's select this thing called never wrap, right? And we say that the white space is going to be no wrap. So let's see how that works. So first of all, this is what we are actually targeting, this lorem ipsum part out here, and it's somewhat like this, and let's see how it changes now. And now you see that it goes completely out to here, so no wrap, it doesn't wrap it around. So you also have pre-wrap. So let me just show you how that works. So I'm going to be targeting this part out here with these weird kind of white spacing. So let's see, preserve wrap. So with preserve wrap we go pre-wrap out here, and that's the property. So let's see, yep, lorem ipsum and the wrap has been preserved. Okay, now you can also set up the direction. So let me just show you how that's done. So we're going to select these two things out here, left, right, and right, left. So hash left, right, and also control C, and let's make this right, left. Fine, let's remove all this stuff for now, and let's remove everything before right, left too. Now that we've removed that, let's remove this, let's save it, let's see. Okay, so this is what it looks like right now, and all you have to say is direction is L to R, so that means left to right. Now here you say direction is RTL. Let's see how that changes stuff. So I prefer right to left, and I prefer left to right, so that's how it's working. Fine. So that was all about white spacing and directions. Now let's move on to gradients and animations. So this is going to be the last part and the most interesting part in my opinion. So gradients are those beautiful backgrounds you see on most websites, and to generate your gradient you can always use this thing called a gradient generator. So this gradient generator out here is a really nice gradient generator. You have to select the direction and you select the ending colors. So I've already selected a gradient out here. It's going to create this gradient. Now let's see, go to page 7. Right, now let's select the body tag. Let's close this off. Let's close this off. I want to save this and let's create a new page first of all, and this is going to be our CSS. So we have to save it and say page 7. Right, now we select our body and just paste in. So let me just explain how this happens. So there's a linear gradient and there's also another thing called radial gradient. So I'll just show you that. Now this takes in a few parameters. The first is to the right, that's the direction, and this is how the colors will change. So let's just see how that works. So first of all, let me comment this out. Let me just open page 7 for you. Now if you see, it's going to be a blank page. Okay, this is a gradient, I'm sorry. Let me save that. Right, so this is what it looks without a gradient, and you already saw what it looks with a gradient, but let me just show it to you again. This is what it looks with a gradient. Now you can also set the background with other stuff like image. So for that you go URL and you can paste in the URL. So let's go and search for a beautiful image. I really like Dragon Ball Z, so Goku Super Saiyan 3. So that should be a good image to save as a background. So let's see, this looks like a really nice image. So you go here. Let me just save this image as. So this is going to be Goku, and it's going to be saved in desktop and CSS tutorial. It's going to be Goku.jpeg. Right, so you can say Goku.jpeg. Right, now that's saved, let's go back to our page and it should have a picture of Goku. Okay, so that didn't work. I think I got something wrong. Let's go and analyze that. So open up our CSS tutorial. Okay, so it's a JPG file and not JPEG, so that was our mistake. Small mistake, nonetheless. And now we have this picture of Goku. Now you can also set the background repeat. Let's close this off. Say background repeat, and you could say no repeat, and it will not repeat the background anymore. Or you could say background repeat is gonna be. Let's check out all the background repeats that are actually available. Now background and repeat. So if you go into background repeat and see the properties, you can just try it yourself. So you can repeat it according to the y-axis, you can repeat it according to the x-axis. So let's see how that works. So repeat x. So if we say that, I think it should repeat it on the x-axis like it was, or you could repeat it on the y-axis. I don't think that'll show up out here, but let's see. Yep, it's now repeating on the y-axis. So that's how background repeat also works. So we've covered that too. Now we've also covered the gradients. Now it's time we do some radial gradient. Now if you remember, let me just go back to the gradient part. So if you have a radial gradient, all you have to say is that it's a radial gradient out here. And a radial gradient doesn't really need direction because it's going to be radial. Save it. Page, and let's reload it. Okay, now we have a radial gradient. Now you see all these lines going in, but if I just zoom out, you can see that it starts from the center and it spreads out where it's white on the sides and white on the sides. So that's how radial gradients work. Okay, so now that we've covered the gradients, let's go into animation. So I think animation is the most interesting thing that you can do with CSS. So we have selected the div. So first of all, let's give the div a border. So this border is going to be 2 pixels, solid and black. Now let's give it a background to begin with. Let's say it's going to be of red. Now this is how you do animations in CSS. Okay, so before animations actually, let me show you how you can move this thing around. Fine, so there's some stuff that I want to show you guys. So let this be. Let me just show you what this looks like. So let me give this a width first. It's going to be 100 pixels, or rather 200 pixels, and the height will also be 200 pixels. Now let's see. Okay, we have this div out here. Let's make it a little bigger. Give it 500 and 500. Save it. Yep. Let's also make this much more prominent. Let's give it a 10 pixel background. I mean a 10 pixel border. And now you see we have a really prominent square out there. Now let's try some really interesting stuff. So let's say div, and when we hover over the div, you want to scale this. So scale, and let's say we want to scale. Okay, so that's not how you scale. First you say transform, and how do you want to transform? You want to scale it, and you want to scale it twice. So when we hover over it, it should scale twice. Let's reload, and as you see, it's scaling twice. Now we can also transform some other stuff like this. So we can rotate. So we can say rotate 45 degrees. Let's see. When I hover, it's rotating 45 degrees. You can also skew it. So skewing is how it works. Let's see. You can skew it 20 degrees to the x-axis and 10 degrees to the y-axis. Save it, and this is how it gets skewed. This is how skewing works. You can also translate stuff. So this is, let me show you how translation works. So translate, and let's see, you want to translate at 20 pixels and 20 pixels. So let's see, hover over it and it translates a little. Let's translate it around 120 pixels just to make it more clear. 120 and 120. Let's save that. Let's reload this, and you see that now it's translating so much, right? So that's how translate works. Okay, now that I've showed you scale, rotation, skewing, and translate, let's see, we can also set up the transitions. So with transitions you can set up a lot of stuff. So now that we're done with transitions, let's go ahead and see some animation. So for animation, I'm going to be actually targeting this div out here. So let's actually style this div. I've given it the width of 100 pixels and a height of 100 pixels, and a background of red, and a border of 3 pixels, solid, and black, let's say, right? Let's see what that looks like. Now that's what it looks like. Fine. Let's zoom in a bit. Now all we need to do is actually set up some keyframes. So we do that by saying keyframes. Now we name our keyframes. Let's call it anime. And we have to set up actually what it will look like at different points in time. So we do that by saying 0%, and it'll have, let's say, a background color of red, and then it'll move. So we want to move it in the square. So let's say it'll be not padding, rather it'll be 0 pixels from the left, and from the top it's gonna be 0 pixels. Let's save that, copy that down. Let's paste that a bunch of times. Now what I want to say is this is going to be 25, it's going to be 50, it's going to be 75, and this is going to be 100. Let's save that. Let's change their colors. So this is going to be yellow first, then changes to green, some pretty basic colors, blue then, and in the end we'll change it to red. So that brings us back to the original position. Let's first also move it by 300 pixels. Then let's move it 300 pixels both ways. Now it's only going to move 300 pixels this way, and in the end it comes back to the original position. Now to use this keyframes animation, we have to give this animation name. It's going to be using the animation with the keyframes name anime. Now we can say the animation delay is going to be 2 seconds. You can also say how many times it's going to be iterating. So you can say that by 100. Let's save that. Okay, so our animation is not working because we haven't set the positioning. So now let us just save this, and let's say our position is going to be relative. Let's save that. Let's uncomment our animation. Now you see that our animation will work as we intended it to. So after 2 seconds our animation starts working, and this will just keep going on and on. Now if you want to actually repeat that animation, there's a way you can do that, and that is with the animation iteration count. Let's say you want to iterate it 100 times. Let's reload, let's wait for 2 seconds, and voila, our animation will keep going on and on and on. So that's how you animate stuff with CSS, guys.
So what is JavaScript? Now JavaScript is basically a high-level interpreted programming language which is used to make web pages more interactive. Now it all started in the year 1995 when Brent and I created JavaScript in a span of 10 days. Since then it has seen multiple versions, updates, and has grown to the next level. Now, JavaScript is basically the language of the web. So it is used to make the web look alive by adding motion to it. Now, to be more precise, it is a programming language that lets you implement complex and beautiful things or design on web pages. Now, let's move on and see what can JavaScript do. So basically, there are a lot of queries about why do we need JavaScript and what it can do when we have HTML and CSS already. But JavaScript as a language helps you build a website that will do a lot more than just gawk at you. Now currently we have hundreds of programming languages and every day new languages are being created. Now among these are few powerful languages that bring about big changes in the market, and JavaScript is definitely one of them. Now JavaScript has always been on the list of popular programming languages. According to Stack Overflow, for the 6th year in a row, JavaScript has remained the most popular and commonly used programming language. Now moving on to what this programming language can actually do, we see that JavaScript is mainly known for creating beautiful web pages and applications. Now an example of this is also the Google Maps. So if you want to explore a specific map, all you have to do is click and drag with the mouse. And what sort of language could do that? Of course, is JavaScript. Now this language is also used in smartwatches. Now the popular smartwatch maker Pebble created Pebble.js, which is a small JavaScript framework that allows a developer to create an application for the Pebble line of watches in JavaScript. Not just that, the most popular websites like Google, Facebook, Netflix, Amazon, etc. make use of JavaScript to build their websites. Now, among things like mobile applications, digital art, web servers, and server applications, JavaScript is also used to make games. A lot of developers are building small-scale games and apps using JavaScript. Now, a lot of people ask about where to run the JavaScript code. Now, when it comes to running the JavaScript code, you can use the console, which is pretty simple because you can just type whatever you want to do with your code and you will see the output here itself. Or you can use any text editor. For example, I will be using the Visual Studio Code and show you how you can write your code here and then how you can run it in your website and see how it works. So you can work it both ways. You can enter any data or input here and then you can go back to your console and check your output. Also, if you have to check anything for your code, you can check it inside the console itself. Now, JavaScript was originally designed to run only in browsers, so every browser has what we call a JavaScript engine that can execute JavaScript code. For example, the JavaScript engines in Firefox and Chrome are SpiderMonkey and V8. So it's pretty easy for you when it comes to running JavaScript code online. Now, JavaScript can build the backend for our web and mobile applications. So, in a nutshell, JavaScript code can be run inside of a browser or in Node browsers, and Node provide a runtime environment for our JavaScript code. So now that you know where the code runs, let's move on and have a look at the different benefits of JavaScript. Now there has to be a reason why so many developers love working on JavaScript. Well, there are several benefits of using this language, such as it's easy to learn and simple to implement. Now it is a weak type programming language, unlike the strong type programming languages like Java and C++, which have strict rules for coding. Now, it's all about being fast in today's world, and since JavaScript is mainly a client-side programming language, it is very fast because any code can run immediately instead of having to contact the server and wait for an answer. Not just that, it has a rich set of frameworks like AngularJS, React.js, which are used to build web applications and perform different tasks. Lastly, it also builds interactive websites. Now we all get attracted to beautifully designed websites, and JavaScript is the reason behind such attractive websites and applications. Now finally, we will have a look at the setting up of the development environment or the IDE. Now there are different editors that you can use for writing your JavaScript code. So there's Visual Studio Code, and then we have Sublime Text, and then we have Atom as well. Now these are pretty famous and popular when it comes to working on any programming language. But when it comes to choosing the favorite one, I would definitely opt for Visual Studio Code. So today I will be using the Visual Studio Code in order to show you all the examples and also explain the fundamentals of JavaScript. Now out of these, my favorite is the Visual Studio Code. It's simple and easy to run your codes here. Now to download Visual Studio Code, you just have to type download Visual Studio Code and just go to the website code.visualstudio.com and get your version that is suitable for your system. Now it's a very simple, lightweight, cross-platform and powerful editor. So if you don't have Visual Studio Code on your machine, go ahead and download it right away. Now, in order to become a front-end developer, you should also be aware with HTML codes. So here we are going to use our HTML code as our host for the JavaScript. Now first thing first, you must get this live server extension installed here before you try to run your JavaScript or HTML code here. So all you have to do is just go to the extensions and then search for live server. Now I have already installed this, so you just have to install this before running any of these codes. So now that you are ready to learn how to code in JavaScript, let's begin with the fundamentals. Now talking about the fundamentals, the first thing is the variables in JavaScript. Now this particular programming language includes variables, which basically holds the data value and it can be changed anytime. So it uses a reserved keyword var to declare a variable. Now all your variables must have a unique name. So now let's get back to our Visual Studio Code. So this is my basic HTML file here. So here I have the HTML head and title, and after that I have the script tag as well. So inside my body I have a head tag that says welcome to Edureka, which means when I go to my website, it will show me this particular head tag, that is welcome to Edureka. Now it's always a good practice to keep your script tag at the end, because the browser parses this file from top to bottom. So if you put the script element here in the head section, you might have a lot of JavaScript code there. So your browser may get busy parsing and executing that JavaScript code, and it won't be able to render the content of the page. Now almost always the code that we have in between the script elements needs to talk to the elements on this web page. For example, if we want to show or hide some elements, so by adding the code here at the end of the body section, we will be confident that all these elements are rendered by the browser. So here we use a variable to store data temporarily in a computer's memory. So we store our data somewhere and give that memory location and name, and with this name we can read the data at the given location in the future. For example, think of the boxes that you use to organize your stuff. You put your stuff in various boxes and put a label on each of them so that you can find your stuff easily. Now a variable is basically like a box. So what we put inside the box is the value that we assign to a variable. Now that's the data, and the label that we put on the box is the name of our variable. So let's see what's the code for declaring our variable here. Now in the old days we used to use the var keyword to declare a variable, but there are certain issues with that. So now we have started using the let keyword to declare a variable. So first we will use the let keyword here, and then we have to declare a name for our variable. And your name should be something that is understandable, or by looking at the code you can see that what you are trying to write. So here I have a code with the variable name. So I have given the name as Edureka, and then I'll just write console.log name. So now once I save this code, and finally we will save this code with the extension .js. So this is our JavaScript file. Now in order to run this in your web browser, you need an HTML file. So now this is where this file will come into existence. So here I have added one source which points to my JavaScript file. So here I have just given an extension as src equals to index1.js, which basically takes me to my JavaScript file. So now when I run this HTML file, it will take me to the browser, and you can see the heading here that is welcome to Edureka. Now how do I get this console? So you just have to right click on your website and go to inspect, And once this window has come up, you can just go to console. Now inside console, you can see that you have Edureka mentioned here. Why? Because we have declared a variable with the name Edureka. So our output was console.log name. So as soon as we run this code and go to our console, you can see Edureka. Now in case I change the name, for example, I'm just changing the name to Learn JavaScript. Now make sure you give something unique because you cannot use the keywords that are there in JavaScript as your variable names or any sort of value. So here I have given the value for my variable as Learn JavaScript. Now once I just save this and go back to my browser, and once I refresh this, you can see that it has been changed to Learn JavaScript. Now previously it was Edureka, and now you can see that the name has changed to Learn JavaScript because the value also has changed here. So now that you have seen how this variable works here, let me tell you about certain rules that you need to follow while writing the name of your variable. Now the first rule is that it cannot be a keyword. That is, it cannot be a reserved keyword in JavaScript. For example, let, where, these are all reserved keywords for JavaScript, so you cannot use them as your variable name. Next up is you should always have a meaningful name. So you must keep in mind that when you are giving a name to your variable, it must be meaningful and understandable while just seeing the name itself. Also, your name must not start with any number. So how odd would that be to just have a name that begins with a number like 1 Edureka or 2 Edureka? So it does not look good that way. So you must not have a variable name that starts with a number. Next up, you must keep in mind that there should not be spaces or hyphen when it comes to the name of your JavaScript. For example, I have written Learn JavaScript here. I can also just write it like this in order to separate the two things, but there should not be a hyphen or a space in between the two words. So you just have to write it together. Also, the names here are definitely case sensitive. That means if I write Learn JavaScript like this and then I change it to Learn JavaScript with a capital L, these two will be considered as different names because it is case sensitive. So now this was all about variables. Now let's move on and take a look at constants. Now by declaring a constant, you basically assign a meaningful name to a value. So once a constant is declared, it cannot be modified or assigned any other value. So now let's see how we can define a constant in JavaScript. So for example, you want to describe your name in two different parts such as the first name and the last name. So suppose you have let first name is equals to Edureka, and then you have last name as JavaScript. So here you would need a semicolon to separate the two things and declare it separately in such a manner. But rather than doing this, you can just use constants that makes your work easier. So now let's see how you can use the constant in your JavaScript code. So now let me just take the variable name as age. So for age, we have a specific value. Suppose I'm giving the age as 23. Now when I type console.log age, and then let me just save this one again. And now once I go back to my website and refresh it, you can see that it gives me the value 23. So here what I'm doing is I'm declaring a variable, but also I'm giving it a constant value. So now I cannot change the value of my age here. Now sometimes we don't want the value for a variable to change because otherwise it's going to create all kinds of bugs in our application. Now in those situations, instead of a variable, we use a constant so that the value of a variable, that is the name implies, can change. But then the value will remain constant. Now in the next line, I give age is equals to 21. And then now let me save this one and see what output do I get when I run this one. So let me just refresh it. So you can see that I get an error here because we have already declared a constant value for age, which is 23. And again, we are changing the value to 21. So this will definitely give you an error, that is the uncaught type error, assignment to constant variable. So here your variable age is a constant. You cannot assign any other value to this variable anywhere. So thus it will show you an error. So basically we cannot reassign a constant. So once you have used constant, you cannot change the value. So the best practice is to use var whenever you're planning to change the value next. So now that you know what are variables and what are constants, you must be wondering what are the kind of values that we can assign to these variables. So now let's move ahead and have a look at the different data types that you can use. So now here we have two different types. So first we have the primitive or the value types, and then we have the reference types. First we will have a look at the different primitive types. Now the data types are basically the type of data that can be used and manipulated in a program. So the different data types include the numbers, strings, boolean, undefined, and null. So now talking about these data types, let's go back to our code and see what are string literals, what are numbers, what are booleans. So let's just type let name equals to Edureka. Then we have another variable as age, which is equals to suppose 23. Now for checking boolean, let's just give another variable as is approved is equals to true. So true and false are the ones that represent our boolean values. So this one is basically our string literal, and this one is our number literal. This one we are using for boolean. Next up, if we just write let first name and put a semicolon, it automatically gives an undefined value to this one. But we can also write it as first name is equals to undefined. So there's basically no value assigned to this particular variable. Now the final one is the null value. So let me just give it as let date equals to null. So now let me just save this, and then let me go back to my console again. Now once I refresh it, so basically I have not given any console here, so there's no output in my console, but then you can always check the type of your literals here. So what I have to do is just type of, and then if I want to check the type of my variable name, so I can just give name and it shows me string. So here I have my name as Edureka, which is a string literal. So this is exactly the value that it is showing me here, that is the type of my name is string. Now let's check the type of age. So you can see that it shows number. So my age declares my number literal here. In the same way, when we type of is approved, suppose I write type of is approved, it will show me boolean. So you can see that inside the console itself, you can find out the types of all of these variables. Now if I just want to check the type of my date, so I'll just write type of date, and it shows an object. Because we do not have any value here, we have a null value which is also considered to be an object in JavaScript. Now this is exactly where the reference type comes in. So these were the different primitive types. Now we will have a look at objects. So now that you have seen the primitive types in JavaScript, we will have a look at the reference types. In the reference type category, we have the object, array, functions. So now we will talk about these three different types. So first let's talk about the object. Now object in JavaScript and other programming languages is like an object in real life. So think of a person who has a name, age, address, and so on. So here I have given three attributes to my particular object. Suppose the girl is my object, so I have three different attributes for this object, that is name, age, and eye color. Now when we are dealing with multiple related variables, we can put this inside our object. For example, we have two variables, name and age here. So what we can do is we can declare it as a property for our object. So we can refer these two as elements or properties for our object. This basically makes the code clear. So now let's see how we can declare an object in JavaScript. So let me just declare my variable as girl, and inside girl I'll add properties for the girl. So we have to begin with the curly braces. So now inside the curly braces I will add the properties. Now the first property was name. So let me just give the name as Emily, and then we have the age as 23, and then we also have another property as eye color. So it's brown. Now we separate these properties with the help of a comma. Now finally we close this curly brace along with a semicolon. Now I will just use the console.log and find the output for my object, which is the girl. So now let me just save this one and let's go back to the console and see how it works. Now inside this I will add the properties for my object, which is the girl. So here you have to give the name of your first property and then use colon, and then I'll just write the name as Emily, and we separate the properties with the help of a comma. So the next property is age. So I'll write it as 23. And then we need to close the curly braces along with a semicolon. Now I'll just type console.log and the name of my object, that is girl, and close it with a semicolon. So here I have declared this variable or my object, which is the girl, and inside girl I have declared certain properties for the girl, which is the name and the age. Now let me just save this one and go back to the console and see. So you can see that once I run this code, I'll get to see the properties for my object. So it shows the name, that is Emily, and age as 23. Now suppose we want to change the name of this particular object. What do we do? So this is exactly where we use the dot notation. So what we will do here is we will just give the name of our object, which is girl.name. Suppose I want to change the name here. So I'll just give the name is equals to, and I'll give another name here. Suppose I want to give the name as John, and then add the semicolon. Now let me just save this one and see what happens to the output. So now once we go to the console, you can see that the name has been changed to John here. Now this is one approach. There's another approach that you can change in order to change the name. So what you can do is use the bracket notation. Now what is this bracket notation? So we can just type girl and use the square brackets. So inside the square brackets, I'll give the name, that is for the variable that I'm planning to change. So my name now will be equal to, suppose I want to give the name as Sam. So I just type Sam and close it with a semicolon. And then now let me save this one. Now once I go back to my console and see, you can see that the name is changed from John to Sam again. So these were two different approaches, that is the dot notation and the bracket notation, through which you can also get into the property of your object and make any particular changes. So now that you have learned how to declare an object, let's move on and see what are arrays and how you can declare arrays in JavaScript. Now the JavaScript array object is basically a global object that is used in the construction of arrays, which are high-level list-like objects. So now in case you have a list of products in a shopping cart, or list of colors or list of items that are used in order to make a painting, you will need to declare them with the help of arrays. Now declaring them just using variables would be hectic because you have to define all of them separately, which might be a tedious task when your list is pretty longer. So now here comes arrays to your rescue. So let's see how the arrays work in JavaScript. So I'm just going to give the name as items, and inside this I will declare my array here. For example, I have certain items inside my list. For example, I have color, then I have paintbrush, and then I have a plate. So suppose these are the items that are present in my list. So what I can do is close it with a semicolon, and then now I'll just use the console.log and I'll put items here. Now let me just save this and go back to the console. And now once I refresh this, you can see that it gives me the value and also what are the items in my list. So you can see that I have added 3 different items in my list, that is colors, paint, brush and plate. So it gives me the value of the number of items inside my list and also what are those different items. So now once I click here, you can see that it also gives me the index value for each one of these items. So in array, the index value always starts from 0 and not from 1. So you can see that the index value for color is 0, and then for paintbrush it is 1, and then finally for plate we have 2. So basically the index value goes from 0. So here we have 0, 1, 2, which means that the total length of the array is 3. So now if you want to display any particular item, you can just use this index value. So suppose I want to display the paintbrush. So what I can do is use the square bracket, give the value as 1 because the index is 0, 1, 2. So the index value for paintbrush is 1. So let me just save this one. And now let's go back to the console. So you can see that the output it gives me is just paintbrush because I have just given the console log item value as 1. That means I only want to see the value that is there in the place of 1. That is, the index value should be 1. Not just that, you can also add something else in your list with the help of the index value. For example, I can just give the name and specify the index value where I want to add something. Suppose I want to add another item, so the index value will now be 3. Because I want to add it at the end of my list, so I've just given the value as 3. And suppose I just want to add sprays, so I'll just type sprays, semicolon, and then I'll just save this code. So I'll add the item sprays here. Now let me just change this so that it shows me the value of all the items. And let me save this one. Now once I go back to my console and reload this, now you can see that the value of the items have changed from 3 to 4, and also another item has been added to my list. And also you can see the index value. So sprays come at the index value 3. That's exactly what I have added, and that is exactly where the value has been added to. Now here you don't need to have a similar type of data. That is, if I want any number to be added here, suppose I just want to add 100. So I can just add this number here and then save the code. So you can see that in the output it will give the value as color, paintbrush, plate and 100. So it need not be a similar data type. You can add different data types and also put it in the array itself. Now if I go back to my console and just type of the name of my list, that is, I've given it as items, you can see that it shows object. So you can see that array is basically a type of object. We can also use the dot notation here and find out various properties. So you can see that you already have different properties that you can find out. So let's just find out the length of my list. So we can just type length, and let me just save this one. Now once we go back and refresh this, you can see that it gives me the length as 4. So basically with the help of dot notation, you can also find out the values or different properties for your array. Now this was all about arrays. So we have seen what are objects and what are arrays. Now it's time to move on and have a look at functions in JavaScript. So functions in JavaScript are divided into 2 different types. First we have the predefined functions, and then we have certain user-defined functions. So basically a function is a subprogram designed to perform a particular task. Now functions are executed when they are called, and values can be passed into functions and used within them. So now let's see how we can declare a function in JavaScript. So here I'll use the keyword as function for declaring any sort of function or the name that I'm going to provide to my function. So now let's see how we can declare a function. So I just want to view welcome to Edureka. So what I do is take the function keyword, and suppose let me just type view, and inside this I'll have to add the curly braces inside which I will have my console.log. So I want to print welcome to Edureka. So now once I close this, now after the curly braces we have to call the function now. So my function name is view. So what I'll do is just call my function here, and now let me just save this one. So now once I go to my console and then I run this code, you can see that it shows me welcome to Edureka. So what actually happened is I have used a function view and I have inserted whatever I want to display, and after that I have called my function here. So what happens is, so inside console log, whatever I have written is displayed in my output with the help of this particular function that has been called here. Now we can also add a parameter. So let me just add a parameter inside my function. So suppose I've added a parameter as name, and here I'll concatenate that particular parameter. So let me just type name here, and then inside my function I will be typing whatever parameter I'm going to pass through it. So inside my function I'll just write learn JavaScript. So here I'm just passing a parameter inside my function. So here I'm giving the name as learn JavaScript. So let me just save this one and go back to the console. So once we run the code, you can see that it shows welcome to Edureka, learn JavaScript. So the value has been concatenated here. So you can see that there's a missing space here because in my code I haven't added the space. So in order to add a space, so you just have to leave it blank and then add it again. And now once I save this code and go back to my console and run it again, now you can see that there's a space after Edureka because here I have added a space and then concatenated the name. So now let's check for the value square. So now let's see how the function works in JavaScript. So here we have taken the keyword as function and we have given a name to our function. Suppose I want to find the square of a number. So I have taken the function name as square. So now inside the square, I've given the parameter as number, and then you have to open the curly braces, inside which I'll return the value that I want as my output. So here I want the square of the number. So I've given the return value as number into number, which will give me the square. Now you have to close the curly braces. Next up, you will define the number now. So here, suppose I want to find the square for number 2. So I have defined the number here as let number equals to square of 2. So I want to find out the square of the number 2. And then finally console.log number. Now once we go to our console, you can see that it has given me the output as 4. Because the square of 2 is 4 and I have asked for the square of the number 2. So this is what the output is. So now that you know how functions work in JavaScript, let's move on and have a look at some conditional statements in JavaScript. Now what are conditional statements? When we use the word as if, else, or we put certain conditions, that is when the conditional statement comes in JavaScript. So let's see how that works. So first let's have a look at the if statement. So suppose I'm declaring a variable here as number. So let number equals to, let it be an undefined array here. Next up, I will define the array, or I will provide a set of numbers inside this particular array. So let me just define this and provide certain values. So let my array be 1, 4, 1, 2, 5, 2. So these are the set of values that I have provided inside my variable. Next up, here I will be using the if conditional statement. So now inside if, we are basically supposed to provide any particular condition. So I have to find a condition here. Suppose I want to check if the number in position 0 is equal to the number in position 2. So this is the condition that I have provided here. So now after the condition, I will just try to get the output. So I'll just give console.log. So let me just say the answer would be yes. So in case the condition is satisfied, it will give me an output as yes. So now let me just close this with a semicolon. So now this is where and how we are using our if conditional statement. So inside if, we have just provided a condition for our variable that we are using. So our condition is that to check whether the number in the position 0 is equal to the number in position 2. And in array, as you remember, the index always starts from 0. So we see that this is 0, 1, 2. So you can see that the numbers in position 0 and 2 are same. So basically the output should be yes. So now let me just save this one and go back to our console and see what it shows. So I get the output as yes because the condition has been satisfied here. My if condition is satisfied, and that is exactly where I've got the output as. So now let's see what is the if-else condition. So it is pretty similar to the if condition. So it's pretty similar to the if condition, just that there's one more condition that gets added here. Now in this case, if both the numbers were not equal, what we would have got. Suppose let me just change this value to 3, and now let me save and see what my output is. So you can see that we do not have any output because I haven't given any value for the next condition. That is, what if these two numbers are not equal? So now this is where the else condition comes in. So I'll show you how you can add the else condition. So you just have to write else, and then I will give another output here. So I will just type console.log and then let it be no. So when the condition is not satisfied, it comes out from this loop and goes inside the else condition, where if the condition is not satisfied, it will give me the output as no. So now let me just save this and go back to the console and see. Now you can see that the output is shown as no because here the condition is not satisfied, so it has come out of this particular condition, and now it's checking the next condition. So here, if this condition is not satisfied, the output would be no. So you can use this if-else condition a number of times, and you can provide different conditions and also provide different outputs for different conditions that you are going to imply here. So now let's move on and have a look at loops. So in JavaScript, we have the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop. So first, let's see how the while loop works. So for that, first I have to declare a variable. Suppose I'm taking I equals to 0. I have to initialize the value of I and then give a condition. So here I'll use the loop. So I'll take while and give the condition as while I is less than 5. That is, the value of I is less than 5. And then I'll give the output here. So it will be console.log number is. Now I'll concatenate the value of I here. And then finally it's I++. So now what happens here exactly is, so I have initialized the value of I as 0. And then I have given a loop which says that while I less than 5, we will be printing the number, that is number is and the particular number. And I++, that is, the value will be incremented after each loop. So what happens here is the loop will start from 0 and it will go on till 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. As soon as the value of I reaches 5, it will come out of this particular loop. And the output will be only from 0 to 4 because, so now in order to check the while condition, first I will initialize the value of I. So let me just take the initial value of I as 0. And then here I'll use my loop. So suppose I'm giving a condition here, that is I is less than 5. And for the value of I less than 5, I will give an output which will be console.log number is, and then I'll concatenate the value of I here. And then finally increment the value of I here. So now what exactly happens here is that, so first I have initialized the value of I to be 0. And then I have considered a condition, that is I must be less than 5. So I had to put it inside a loop. So I have taken the while loop here. So what we consider is while the I value is less than 5, our output will be number is, and it will take the particular number. So it will count from the number 0 and go on till 4. Now as soon as the number reaches 5, it will come out of this particular loop. The I++ is for the increment, that is from 0 to 4. And as soon as it reaches 5, it will come out of this particular loop, and then only the number 0 to 4 will be visible in our output. So now let me just save this and see what happens. So let's go back to the console. So now you can see that the number is printed as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So as soon as the number reached 5, it has come out of this particular loop. So this is exactly how the while loop works. Now in a similar manner, you can also use the for or the do while in order to insert loops in your JavaScript code. So in do while, what happens is, first you make the task happen, that is, you use the do keyword and put your output or whatever value you want, and then later on you put the condition. So the condition is checked later, whereas in while, first you check the condition and based on that you provide the output. Okay, so this was about the while loop in JavaScript. Now let's move ahead and see that how does the do while loop works in JavaScript, and also how the do while is different from the while loop. So in case of do while loop, what happens is the condition comes a little later. So first we declare the variable, and here we take our do loop, and inside the curly braces we give our output. So we have our output as number is, and we concatenate the value of I, and then we increment it as I++. Now once we're out of this loop, here we will be adding our while loop. So here we will be giving our condition. So suppose I'm giving the condition as I less than 6. So what happens is, now it will take the values till 5 only, and what happens here is it will keep printing the value and come out of the loop and check for the value or the condition that I have provided inside the while loop. So now let me just save this one and go back to my console and refresh this and see. So here you can see that it's printing the value from 0 to 5. So previously we had given the condition as I should be less than 5, so it printed till the value 4. Now in my do while loop I have checked till I value less than 6. So here it has printed the value from 0 to 5. And as soon as the value is more than 5 or the value goes to 6, it comes out of the loop. So now let's move on to the for loop and see how the for loop works. So while using for loop, you don't have to initialize the value here. So here we will begin with our for loop, and inside the for loop there are 3 sections. In the first section you initialize the value for I. So here we are giving I equals to 0. And then the next section is the condition for the I value. So here I am giving the condition as I value should be less than 7. And finally we will give the increment or decrement value. So I'm giving I++ here. And finally we give our output, that is console.log number is, and we concatenate the value of I here. Now instead of declaring your variable here, you can do one more thing. So what you can do is, inside your for loop itself, you can just type let and then initialize the value in this manner as well. So now let me just save this one. And now let's go back to our console and see what is the output. So you can see that I have given my condition that I value should be less than 7. So what it prints here is the value from number 0 to number 6. So you can see that using the for loop is pretty easier compared to the other loops. You do not have much to worry, or you do not have too many sections to be divided in this. You just have to use the for loop, inside which you can initialize the value of your variable and also provide the condition, and then give the increment or decrement value all together. And finally you just have to add the output, that is whatever you want to print. So this is all about for loop, and with this we come to the end of loops. So we have learnt about the while loop, do while loop and the for loop, and how these 3 loops work in JavaScript, and how easily you can define any variable and insert it into the loops. So for any sort of condition, rather than writing the same thing twice or thrice or number of times, what you can do is you can just put them inside the loops and let it just take place all at once. Now the final thing that we can discuss in JavaScript is the switch statement. So what is the switch statement? So if you have a number of cases that you are supposed to check inside any particular program, so you can use the switch statement. So what happens is, inside your switch statement you can add various cases and then go for the value that you want to execute. So let's see how the switch statement works in JavaScript. So for example, let me just take a variable as let game equal to, let me just take any particular game such as cricket, it's World Cup season anyway. So let's take the value of my game as cricket. Now you just have to use the switch statement, inside which I will just declare my variable game. So first we take the switch condition, inside which I'll take the variable as game, and inside the curly braces I will have my first case. So my first case, I'm adding the game as football. So whenever the game football appears, I will just give the output as console.log. I don't want to watch football. Now this is our output, and then we give the break statement so that we can switch into our next case. So now if we consider another case, and suppose here we have hockey, and then we will give another output for hockey, that is console.log, and then we put console.log as I don't play hockey, and then break the statement again. Now the next case would be cricket. So suppose I have cricket here. So I will just give the output here as console.log. I love cricket. Now in case I hadn't initialized any particular game here, so we always need a default value when it comes to switch statement. So here what we do is we take another default value, and for our default value we give another console.log. So we just give match not found. So this is how we write a switch statement in JavaScript. Now let me just save this one and go back to my console and refresh this. Okay, so there's some error. Let's see. So yeah, we just had to put colons instead of semicolons. Now let me just save this one. And now let's go back to our console and see. So you can see that the output is I love cricket. Because here I have already initialized the game to be cricket. So what I want to see is whenever the switch statement comes in, and inside switch we have various cases, it will only take the output where I have the value for game as cricket. Now in case I change this value to football, and now let me just save this one. Now let's go back to our console and refresh it and see. And it says I don't want to watch football, because for my football case I have given the output as I don't want to watch football. So this is exactly what is getting printed, or this is what we get as the output. Now let me see, let me just give foosball, and we do not have foosball in any of these cases, so it should go to the default value. But let's see what is the output here. So let me just save this one now and go back to the console and refresh it. Yes, so exactly we get the output as match not found, because it goes to the default value. So in case any of these are not found or matched with the initialized value, it provides us with the default value here. So this was all about the switch statement in JavaScript. Now with this you know a lot more about the loops and switch statement, and before that you have also learnt about all the fundamentals such as the object, arrays, strings, and how you can take the syntax and include everything inside your JavaScript code, and also how you can get it inside your console and see what is the output with the help of your HTML file as well. So now with all of these you have learnt about the variables, objects, functions, arrays, loops, and conditional statements in JavaScript. Now this will help you create your own website. Now you can beautifully design your website with the help of JavaScript, and also by playing around with these fundamentals of JavaScript.
So let's look at the basic DOM structure. So basic DOM structure, this is just a simple HTML document here, and they have laid it out in a tree sort of pattern. Okay, there is the document, it's the parent of everything else, the document tag. Within the document tag, then you have HTML tag, which further contains head and body, and then head contains title, and title contains some text over here, if you look at this, right? And then you have h1 tag, which contains some text, and then you have the p tag, which contains some text. The DOM really refers to, so whenever you're writing HTML, what is really happening is that you're writing certain directions to a browser. So a browser is a software, right? Through writing HTML, you're writing certain directions to the browser that, hey, paint my web page in a certain way. So it's like if you had a friend and he had a canvas, that canvas and that friend together are the browser. And you as a developer are the person who's instructing this browser or person, and you're telling this person, hey, draw a box for me, make it this wide, make it like this, make it have this shadow effect, print or display a message like box 1 over it, the font size, the font weight, multiple things, right? Or if it's a document, like let's suppose you're dictating a document to somebody, okay, the heading should be jQuery training. Start with the subheading jQuery intro, then start with the paragraph, plan your jQuery training now. So that is sort of the way that the browsers work. This HTML is essentially directions. They are essentially directions to the browser. Okay, what the browser does is that it takes those directions and creates something called as a DOM, a document object model, out of it. Now, why does it create a DOM? Because it needs to apply the styles that you have provided from the CSS. It needs to do several things to it. So it converts it into something called as a DOM and makes it available to you and to itself for manipulation. And a large part of JavaScript or jQuery has to deal with DOM manipulation. And you're going to figure that out as you go along. Right. So when it comes to DOM manipulation, right, if you look at this example, so let's talk about this particular line. Let's suppose that there is a div tag with the ID results. This particular line basically gets that element, gets that DOM element to you in this variable, in this JavaScript variable. And the following lines are setting the HTML inside it. So basically you are setting HTML or you're setting text inside an HTML using JavaScript. Now that's a very powerful concept, right? Right there. That you can deliver a web page to a user with a certain look and feel, and then based on how the user decides to interact with it, you will make changes to that web page. You can literally change this entire web page right there and then, because you have JavaScript helping you out, because it has access. It can read that HTML document, that DOM. It can read that DOM and pick out the nodes in the DOM. So think of these as nodes, and think of jQuery having access to each of these nodes and having the ability to modify each of these nodes, whether it is the content of the node or it is something else that it can do to a node. Now, one thing about the DOM is that every browser behaves a little differently. So if you have ever felt that your website doesn't look the same on Chrome versus Mozilla versus Internet Explorer versus Opera or versus Safari, and I'm sure you must have experienced this with even very good websites, like they tend to differ quite a bit depending on how careful the developers were. So the reason is that it's not broken, it's just that every browser behaves differently. So it's like this. Consider each of the browser as a person, right? You are giving directions to paint the DOM. So you want something called as a document to be painted or printed on a canvas, and you're giving instructions to each browser. But each browser behaves differently. Each, like a person, the browser behaves differently to instructions. Now 90 to 95% of the behavior is similar, but that 10%, 15%, depending on what kind of instructions you're giving, might change. So the websites don't look massively different, but they're still a little different, right? So that comes from who developed that browser, what did they want to build it for, what is the main purpose. So Internet Explorer, for example, is built primarily for security. It is supposed to be very secure. Chrome is built for something else, Firefox is built for speed, Safari is built for something else, Opera is built for something else. And based on those decisions, sometimes these behaviors change, where they might not react to a CSS property, or they might not perceive a certain way in a certain way, in a certain directive in a certain way. So this is a problem. This is a huge problem for developers who have to build quickly, and they have to build websites which would sort of at least 90 to 99% of the time behave in a similar way across browsers. Because if you were to build for different browsers, or if you were to write separate code, say doing the same thing for different browsers, it would be just too much work. And developers are supposed to be lazy, right? So jQuery helps us out. jQuery really helps us out. So think of jQuery like a manager, okay? Think of jQuery like a manager who knows each of the workers. So if these are my friends, he knows the behavior of each and every friend. He knows Firefox requires more directions than Chrome, or Chrome is a bit slower than Internet Explorer, or Internet Explorer needs to be given the instructions slowly. Now, these are not the actual differences, but I'm just giving you an example. Now, as a manager, jQuery knows how to deal with the different behavior of different browsers. So it eliminates the need for us to write code specific to browsers. Instead, it takes care of it for us. That is the first and the most fundamental reason why jQuery is so popular. That it removes the dependency to write code for each and every individual browser. Makes it very easy for people like you and me to build websites really quickly. Okay. So what is jQuery then? So jQuery is essentially a JavaScript library. So it is still JavaScript. What is the difference between JavaScript and jQuery? JavaScript is a language. jQuery is a library built using JavaScript. So jQuery fundamentally is nothing but a lot of JavaScript code that has been written by developers who are way experienced, who have 20 to 25 years of experience developing and programming and so on and so forth. So jQuery is just a library. Now, it was first released in 2006. It's one of the most popular libraries with cross-browser support. It is lightweight being that the size isn't too much. It improves developer efficiency, of course. Easy to learn because it relies on a lot of CSS-based syntax. We'll come across this soon. And the current latest releases are 1.9 or 2.1. You can use either. Both are sort of the latest releases. And so let's move ahead. Now, the next question is why jQuery? So jQuery is a JavaScript library designed to simplify the client-side scripting naturally because the syntax being similar to CSS, cross-browser support. It helps in creating dynamic web pages. Dynamic in terms of whenever you are able to manipulate the DOM, that is what adds a dynamic nature to your web page and your web application. So that is one of the fundamentals again, that it creates dynamic web pages which respond to user input. It is intuitive and easy to learn. It integrates with IDEs, so IDEs have out-of-the-box support for it. It helps in pages loading faster. So because the size is small, the download time of the library in itself is small, which helps out. So generally when you find websites to be slow, either it's your internet connection, and if that's not the case, then the website is heavy. Heavy being that the size of the code that you're downloading to run the website is a lot. Next is that it helps in creating animated pages like Flash. So before JavaScript or jQuery or even jQuery became really popular, one of the typical ways to animate a web page was using Flash. However, that meant that as a front-end developer, you had to learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Flash. Further, Flash is not, I think it would be sort of sufficient to say that it's not the most elegant of things to deal with when it comes to browsers. Again, a lot of problems across browsers and across OS as well. So what happens is that jQuery, because it's so easy to use and there are so many functions already built in, it provides us with a lot of functionality to create animation, which is similar to Flash but without using Flash. So in terms of you learning newer things, it reduces the number of newer things that you have to learn. You don't have to learn Flash and you're still able to create beautiful animations using jQuery, which is also a part of a dynamic web page, right? A web page which can sort of animate based on user input or based on certain sections being loaded and so on. So HTML document type, it informs the browser what document type it is. And again, it has to do with the interpretation of the document. So again, the HTML document just contains directions to paint a web page. And the doc type basically tells the browser which version of directions these are. And so it is very important. Till HTML4, this was the way that you would mention the HTML document type, and from HTML5 it's just very simple. You just type this and that's it. This would be sufficient. Now CSS selectors. So whenever you give directions in terms of, hey, I want the box to be of red color, or I want the font to be 14 pixel, or I want to divide up the page in columns of 20%, 20%, and 40%, right? You write that code as CSS, but then how